because we're not officially organized under the 118th Congress, but we are anxious to get to work. So before we get started, please be aware that all the microphones are turned on and side conversations may be picked up on the live stream. Okay. To help our tech team, I'm going to count down from 5 to give them the heads up on the live stream. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Committee on Energy and Commerce's roundtable discussing the examination of big tech's role in the ongoing fentanyl crisis affecting Americans across the country. The age of the internet has provided us with great benefits. It's allowed us to remain close to family and friends, even though we may be miles apart. Provides us an opportunity to obtain essential goods and services more conveniently, especially for seniors and those living with disabilities. And we can access valuable information on demand. While an incredible tool, this level of access has created an environment where bad actors can take advantage of vulnerable citizens online. And this exploded during the pandemic. We're here today because we've all heard from constituents about the dangers that they and their children face online. In many instances, big tech companies have failed to be good stewards on their platforms. We've seen numerous reports detailing how big tech encourages addictive behaviors in our children to keep them glued to their screens and fails to protect their users from malicious actors on their platforms like drug dealers, targeting vulnerable populations with counterfeit drugs laced with fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances. Every day, more Americans die from illicit fentanyl poisoning, an estimated 200 a day. Today, children are dying from fentanyl poisoning. These deaths can be prevented. They must be prevented. Last year, the Energy and Commerce Republicans sent letters to the CEOs of certain big tech companies calling on them to do their part to protect children from fentanyl poisoning. While we recognize that many social media platforms have engaged in education campaigns to combat the use of legal drugs, it's not enough. We must take an all-hands-on-deck approach to preventing the sale and transfer of these illegal drugs on these platforms to prevent one more child from dying. Today, I'm thankful that we have a group of panelists who can help us understand the challenges of attacking the fentanyl crisis. And we hope to be able to discuss difficulties in holding these drug dealers accountable and what more social media can do on their own and in collaboration with law enforcement to create a safer experience for the users on their platforms. Today, we'll hear from Spokane County Sheriff John Nowels, who's working every day to protect Americans from harm, including drug dealers on social media. And I just appreciate you traveling from Spokane, Washington to join us and all your work to keep people in Eastern Washington safe. I want to thank Amy Neville for sharing your story, Amy, with us today. As a mom, I cannot imagine the pain of losing a child, and I just appreciate your bravery, your leadership in being here and speaking for so many others and making a difference. Carrie Goldberg, who testified before the committee last year on Section 230 reform, and she's going to provide important insights in holding big tech accountable. And Laura Marquez-Garrett with Social Media Victims Law Center, who can share her experience working on behalf of victims who have been subjected to fentanyl poisoning after purchasing a pill online. These are not easy conversations to have, but they are necessary to raise awareness and end preventable deaths of our fellow Americans and our children. We have a great opportunity to address these issues this Congress, and I look forward to working with all of you. I want to thank our participants for taking time out of your busy schedules to travel to Washington, D.C. for sharing your stories, your expertise. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and provide some opening remarks. And then we're good. We have a whole bunch of members here that want to engage and ask some questions too. So with that, I'm going to start with Amy Neville. Thank you.
The members of this committee.
Maybe you gotta press a button.
Oh, looky there. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all on this committee for having me today. I'm happy that I can share my experience and knowledge with you, but I sure wish it was under different circumstances. All right, so now for the hard part. One sunny day in June of 2020, I was preparing to take my 14-year-old son, Alexander, to the orthodontist. I went to his room to wake him, and there he laid, looking like he was just asleep on his beanbag chair, except he wasn't sleeping. Alex was dead. His father tried CPR, the paramedics tried naloxone, but it was too late. Alex had taken a pill he believed to be Oxycontin. Turned out that it was a counterfeit pill made with fentanyl. That fake pill had enough fentanyl in it to kill 4 people. We only had him 14 years. That amazing child who could do anything that he set his mind to was gone. Prior to his end, Alex was a skateboarder. He scouted and he experimented. Alex was curious about everything and would master subjects. At points in his life, he was an Egyptologist, a Civil War historian, a Pokemon encyclopedia, and so many more things. By the time we learned Alex had been using cannabis, he had also mastered Snapchat. Through this app, Alex was able to overcome the natural limits that keep most kids from trying the hardest drugs. The natural limits that exist for his generation and others include a supportive family, a good school, a strong community, and other safeguards that we knew to provide. Follow the plan and it will all work out. Social media, however, transcends these natural limits. With Snapchat, Alex's normal circle of friends expanded further and began intersecting with abnormal circles. It was on Snapchat that Alex was able to visit with dealers and other users. It was on Snapchat that he set up a deal to get pills. It was on Snapchat that he made plans to have the dealer drive up to our house so Alex could sneak out for a couple of minutes one night and get anything he wanted. On Snapchat, messages are truly ephemeral and are deleted as soon as they are viewed. Taboo speech, backstabbing, narcissism, anything can all be conveyed through the app with little concern for consequences because the history vanishes after it's read. Drug dealers, child abusers, and other criminal users appreciate these privacy features too. For them, Snapchat is a portal to other markets that were previously inaccessible, and they readily take advantage. Snap and other social media companies are free of liability for this behavior on their platform because our laws were written to protect them. The only part Snap has ever been accountable for is to answer to law enforcement subpoenas. Yet, according to interviews with police that we did for our best practices to combat drug trafficking on social media, sheriffs, federal agents, and many times Snap is very slow to respond to court orders if they respond at all. After meeting with parents of dead users, Snap posted public safety announcements on their platform with minimal efficacy. More importantly, through a network of lobbyist lawyers and a $100 billion portfolio, Snap has assembled a well-oiled lobbying machine to avoid any public policy changes that might assign some responsibility for the deaths that their platform facilitates. To paraphrase Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen, for companies like Snap, lobbying and litigation are simply the cost of doing business. As of today, this is the current map of known deaths where drug dealers using Snapchat has killed a customer with a fake pill. This includes all counterfeit pills, with the majority being fentanyl. Again, this is just for the deaths attributed to pills and Snapchat. And this is, all of these states have multiple deaths. And the ones that are not, or that are still blue, it's just a matter of time. It's just going through the verification process and connecting with law enforcement before we can actually fill those in. I thank Partnership for Safe Medicines for doing such good work on this. This map does not include the millions who survive and the tens of thousands more who will die before the year is out. So I ask you, if an airplane company killed this many people in just a few years, would their planes be flying today? Or would we have grounded them until we were sure they were safe? If a car company's vehicles killed drivers and passengers in this many states, would there not be a call for legal and financial accountability? An investigation that resulted in changes in business practices? We wouldn't ban planes and cars forever, but we'd make sure before we put people back in them that they were fixed. We are at an inflection point with Snapchat. Something has to be done. Congress can force him to accept responsibility and do better. And I have some ideas about that, and I hope that at some point in this Congress we can talk about these things. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair Rodgers and each member of this committee. My name is Carrie Goldberg, and I founded the law firm C.A. Goldberg P. LLC 9 years ago to represent victims of catastrophic injuries from all over the country, by now well over 1,100, every age, gender, race, religion, and all of their injuries stem from internet companies. On December 1st of 2021, I was here testifying to this very same subcommittee under different leadership about the enormous hurdles in holding tech companies liable for harming their users. The main hurdle, of course, being Section 230. In that hearing 14 months ago, I told the subcommittee that over the past 6 months, I'd been meeting with 7 families, each whose child was killed because they purchased one fentanyl-laced pill on Snapchat. I'm now going on 2 years of working with these families as they fight to prevent other families from suffering the same tragedy. Today's event is the roundtable on big tech and fentanyl poisoning crisis. But what you're going to hear today is that almost all fentanyl poisonings have 3 things in common. Number 1, the purchaser was a teenager. Number 2, they had no intention of buying fentanyl, but thought that they were purchasing something recreational. And number 3, the transaction occurred through the online platform Snapchat. Big tech has many problems, but the lethal fentanyl sales is not a general big tech problem. It's a Snap-specific problem. Snap's product is designed specifically to attract both children and illicit adult activity. In the almost 2 years that we've been working with these families, we've fought for Snap to change its product to address the features that make it so attractive to dealers and kids alike, and that make sport of evading parental oversight. Instead, though, they've let the body count increase, with almost 20% of all fentanyl deaths we know about occurred on Snapchat in the last 14 months since I was here testifying. In October of 2022, we filed the first lawsuit in the country against Snap, saying it was an unreasonably dangerous and defective product for the design features that make Snap the one and only hunting ground for lethal fentanyl overdoses. We are suing on behalf of 9 families, 8 of whom laid a child to rest, including Amy Neville here, a tireless advocate and the mother of Alexander Neville, who was forever 14. And we brought on the Social Media Victims Law Center to co-counsel with us, who are here today. We've studied the features that make Snap's design so rife for dangerous drug deals. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Number 1, Snap's foundational product feature is disappearing messages, which draws in both minors interested in evading parental oversight, as well as drug dealers interested in dealing to vulnerable minors without detection. Number 2, Snap is the only social media product that markets to children while also encouraging anonymity. Snap's geolocating feature makes child users findable to dealers passing through their locality. It's called Snap Maps. The self-destructing texts, the expiring posts, and the secure data vault enable dealers to complete transactions without a trace. Snap's hashing feature makes it easy for users interested in buying drugs to match with users seeking to sell it. The quick ad feature recommends children to adult users through an unknown algorithm, and Snap points incentivize those children to add these strangers. Snap's most dangerous aspect is its youthful membership. Snap is widely accepted as having cornered the market on teen and tween engagement. It's the only app that's aimed at children where parents cannot see the content. Yet Snap still wants parents to be responsible for what their kids do on it. Snap's permanently auto-deleting content evades police warrants, and its negligent content moderation protects dealers' accounts even after Snap learns that these people have killed other users. Snap has a veneer as being safe and fun for kids. With its funny filters, it's usually among the first apps installed on a child's first iPhone. Within families, it's seen as safe and familiar and trustworthy. Then with its streaks, which reward daily use, and its Snap points, which rewards the eyeballs on the screen, Snap becomes addictive. Even with this lawsuit, nothing has changed. We're aware of 3 more fentanyl deaths since filing it that all happened on Snap. But we really can't have a conversation about Snap's product features, which have basically built a patchwork drug cartel, without talking about why it's this way. And as always, Section 230 disincentivizes the adoption of safety features on big tech platforms. The hubris of not believing that they're ever going to be held liable stops companies like Snap from adopting safety measures to keep people safer. They also never have to go through the discovery process in court. As a result, Snap can make all sorts of false claims about its data collection, the extent to which its data collection of children informs recommendations, algorithms, and it can just keep on creating the propaganda that it's a neutral tool. With this case, our clients are taking their chances to hold Snap liable as a defective product and hold Snap responsible for running one of the biggest drug cartels in the world, profiting richly from it. The time allotted to me right now doesn't allow for the full details of how common sense reform we need is, but I'm going to bullet point it quickly right now. We must stop protecting platforms that provide material support to interstate drug dealing of counterfeit pills. We must stop protecting platforms that knowingly violate criminal laws by allowing interstate drug dealing of counterfeit pills. We must require that the highest executives account for the activities on their platforms that have enabled kids to buy fentanyl-laced drugs and die. Those executives need to come in and testify. And we need statutes that establish youth privacy and design protections. Of course, Section 230 carve-outs for wrongful death. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Laura, please.
All right. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for shedding light on these very important and very difficult issues. My name is Laura Marquez-Garrett. I'm a Washington State attorney, and last year, I walked away from partnership at one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms to join SMVLC, Social Media Victims Law Center. Now, that decision was motivated by the fact that first and foremost, I'm the mother of 4 young children, and I'm afraid for them. I'm afraid for the very real harms they will suffer at the hands of social media companies if something doesn't change. Now, currently, SMVLC represents over 1,000 families. These are parents whose children have suffered severe mental health harms, exploitation, even death, arising from social media use. But I'm not here today to talk about the wide range of harms these companies are causing to American youth, just one harm. And that's the role of social media in the fentanyl poisoning crisis. Now, in October of 2022, SMVLC, with our co-counsel, Carrie Goldberg, filed our first fentanyl complaint on behalf of 9 families. We now represent more than 47 families whose children have been harmed or have died because of because of fentanyl poisoning. 43 of those 47 children are dead. Almost half of those children were under the age of 18, as young as the age of 13. And in every one of the instances where these children were connected to a drug dealer by a social media app, one app was used, Snapchat. So I'm here today to tell the committee that the death of American children by fentanyl poisoning is not a social media issue. It's a Snapchat issue. Now, I provided some documents the other day to help assist with this. I'd like to go through those briefly. The first provides some background on the fentanyl crisis. What makes this crisis different is that for the first time in our nation's history, children, teens, and young adults are dying at the same, if not greater rates than their adult counterparts. We must ask ourselves, and we must ask Snapchat, how and why these drug dealers have virtually unfettered access to our children in the first place. The second document are some SMVLC case statistics for fentanyl-related harms. The third is a document called Snap Knows. Thank you. As well as some examples of Snapchat drug menus. That's much better. This document describes just some of the unique Snapchat features that make the product particularly dangerous to children. The fourth are photos of just 25 of the children who have died from fentanyl poisoning in connection with the Snapchat app. I also provided a larger facts section document which provides background. That document contains excerpts from police reports and testimonials from parents that refute the representation Snapchat has been making to this committee and to the American public for years. Snap knows. Snap knows that this is a Snapchat issue. It knows that it could make meaningful changes to its product to help keep our children safe. Instead, it has opted for empty promises, and children are continuing to die as a result. And I'll provide a few examples. Snap says that it is investing in content moderation, except that Snap also says it has no legal obligation to moderate content. That's Section 230 argument. Snap says it is taking steps to block search results for drug-related terms. But many of these children were not searching for drug-related terms. They were being connected to dealers and exposed to drug advertising content by the Snap product and designs. Snap says it is improving law enforcement support. But the speed at which Snap responds to subpoenas, when Snap responds to subpoenas, is not the number one hurdle for the men and women of law enforcement. The number one hurdle is that Snap is deleting or not preserving data that is critical to their efforts to put these dealers behind bars. Snap says it is working on technology to help identify and take down dealer accounts. We believe that technology already exists and has existed for some time, but also Snap does not even provide effective in-app reporting tools for users and parents, and it does not take down known dealer accounts. Again, the facts section we provided provides several examples of this. To be clear, SMVLC does not condone the sale or purchase of illegal drugs. We do, however, recognize that children make mistakes. None of these children deserve to die because of one mistake. Now, I'd like to update our second document really briefly. This was the SMVLC statistics document. This was prepared last Friday. This shows that SMVLC is working with 47 families on these issues. As of yesterday morning, less than 2 business days after preparing this document, that number has gone up to 50. Monday morning, as I was preparing these statements, I received a call from a mother in Kansas. Her son died of fentanyl poisoning after ingesting a single pill purchased through the Snapchat app, a counterfeit pill. Today is Jason's birthday. He would and should have turned 23 today. Instead, he will be forever 21. We receive calls like this almost every single day. That is how prevalent this issue is. Madam Chair, members of the committee, we need your help. Our children need your help. Thank you. Thank you.
Chair Rodgers, committee, thank you for inviting me here today. It is my honor to address you and to talk to you about the significant threat that fentanyl is posing to all of the communities in this country. I can tell you a little bit about specific data from Spokane County, and I assure you there is similar data that you would have in your own jurisdictions that you represent in the cities and towns and the communities that you represent here. From 2017 to 2021, the Spokane Field Office for the Drug Enforcement Agency reported a 1,098% increase in fentanyl seizures. During the same time period in Spokane County, we saw a 1,233% increase in fentanyl overdose deaths. Between 2020 and 2021, Spokane County saw a 186% increase in fentanyl-related deaths, and we expect at least another 100% increase in 2022. The data is not final yet, but that's what we anticipate. I have been the commander of our Regional Safe Streets Task Force, a federal task force, FBI task force in Spokane for the last 7 years. I can tell you that all of the people that we arrest for distributing mid to upper level narcotics quantities, all are dealing fentanyl. They may be dealing other drugs primarily, whether it be methamphetamine or cocaine or things like that, but they all distribute fentanyl as well. We are also finding that fentanyl is laced into almost all drugs that are being sold illicitly on the street. I recently had a conversation with a service provider with one of our homeless populations in Spokane. And I was advised that many of the homeless in Spokane will tell the service providers what their drug of choice is, and it doesn't matter what their drug of choice is stated to be, their blood work still tests positive for fentanyl. It is in every drug that is being distributed in our country. We have a significant problem. And as these previous witnesses have testified to you, social media and electronic communication are a significant tool that our drug traffickers are using to impact our communities negatively. I will tell you that we have had to make significant investment in law enforcement to keep up with technology. I represent a community of about 560,000 people in the state of Washington. I have about 257 commissioned officers. I have to employ 7 full-time investigative analysts with technical expertise and invest over $150,000 a year in equipment and in software to deal with accessing, discovering evidence in social media. I spend almost $1 million annually to be able to keep up with technology to provide law enforcement services to the victims of crime in Spokane County. Specifically, people who investigate controlled substance homicides, where, as these ladies have so eloquently stated, is very much driven on social media. The evidence we have to recover is contained in these social media accounts like Snapchat and in other communication platforms such as WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and the like. We are finding as time goes on that there are more and more online ways to communicate and distribute drugs than we can even keep up with. Frequently, when we make arrests of a drug trafficking organization, we find that they've been using a communication platform that previous to that we had no idea what it was. The challenge we receive, or the challenge we have in law enforcement, is threefold, where it comes to technology companies. There is a complete lack of retention of data, and there is nothing that obligates them to retain data. There are no laws that require these companies to be responsive to legal process within a timely manner. True, some companies do provide data when they have it, but it is not consistent and it is not mandated. Law enforcement needs help with that. We also have a huge issue with encryption, end-to-end encryption between users, where even if the big data company, the big tech company has the data stored, no one has the encryption keys to make the data usable. It leaves a huge hole in our ability to gain evidence and hold people accountable. We need help to combat this. Our drug dealers are all too often allowed to operate in secrecy, and there is nothing that even the federal government and federal law enforcement can do about it. This is a significant issue in every community in this country. We need help to hold people accountable who are poisoning our children, poisoning people who are using illicit drugs, and they know how dangerous fentanyl is. It is a homicide. It is murder to be delivering these substances knowingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Sheriff. And again, everyone, thank you for sharing, testifying today. Thank you for the work that you are doing to protect kids and others from fentanyl poisoning specifically. Amy, I just, as a mom, can't imagine what you've been through. Really, really appreciate you being here, the courage that you're displaying to share your own story, but also to advocate for so many others. I'd like to start by asking you, I'm a mom, I have a 15-year-old son, and I have 2 daughters. Just how would you advise other parents to protect their kids from the harms they may encounter on social media, and what can parents be doing specifically?
That answer kind of varies family by family, right? Every family has their own set of unique circumstances, but the short answer is really get their passwords, spot check their social media. I mean, these are things that we did in our own home, and we're still here in this mess. Our internet went off at a certain time. We were following all the rules and things that we're being advised to, but more importantly, parents need to drop whatever stigma they have of who they think this type of happens to, or the not my kid mentality, because that is an incredibly dangerous way to think, because you know what? It is not your kid until it is your kid. And so we need to do away with that thinking and look at how could this actually happen in our household? What steps can we take to prevent that? And some of those things include third-party apps that do track any dangerous activity that might be going on your child's phone. But to that end, Snapchat doesn't allow those to work with their platform. So again, when it comes to Snapchat, it's not going to help you. Snapchat does have their own parental controls, which Parent Center, which I recommend if your kid is on Snap and there's no way to avoid that, to definitely go on that and implement those tools. However, that requires you to create an account, increasing more usership on Snapchat. And then you still don't get to see what your kid is talking about. And they equate that to, you don't go in the back bedroom when a friend comes over into their bedroom and listen to what they're talking about. Maybe not, but you know what? When a friend comes over, I can vet that kid. I get to talk to that kid in person. I have that opportunity to meet their parents. And when they do go into the child's bedroom, they still have Snapchat. So it really doesn't ultimately change anything. Those harms are still prevalent. You can't see what they're doing. So really have that open conversation. And then overall, if your kid is not on social media yet, wait until at least 8th grade. Wait until 8th to get that in their hands, because they are going through puberty. Things are happening so fast in their bodies, and these social media apps, these spending the time on online platforms, is damaging to that frontal lobe and creates a whole other world of problems. So that's the short answer.
Thank you. Well, like every American family, we're battling the screens in our house every day, and it doesn't feel like a fair fight. Sheriff, Spokane. I also represent Spokane. It's long been known as just a big small town, great place to live, great place to raise a family. It just is a bit terrifying to hear what's happening in Spokane, as well as all across the country. So I'd like just to ask you to speak a little bit more about the barriers that you are facing as sheriff when it comes to trying to work with big tech on these fentanyl cases.
Thank you. Some of the larger challenges that we run into, and again, we are very well positioned in Spokane County because of some investments we've made in personnel and the expertise to actually, write search warrants, write preservation letters to social media companies. That's the moment that we know we need, or that there might be evidence on some of these platforms. But even then, some providers, and I will say, like Telegram, like Signal, like WhatsApp, they pride themselves on the fact that they are not storing data. That's how they advertise themselves to users, is we're not going to store the data, and if police come looking for it, we will not provide the data. And frequently, we are told when we serve processes to these providers is the information is stored on servers that is not in the United States. Therefore, your subpoena, your warrant has no standing. There is no jurisdiction and we can't comply. And we've had responses for, the servers in the Emirates, the servers in Australia, and these companies are doing business intentionally that way to prevent law enforcement from being able to recover evidence that is critical to some of these cases. And make no mistake, it's not just drug dealing that this is prevalent in. Because we use electronic data so much, it is a part of every investigation that we have, whether it's homicides, child sexual assault, abuse. All of those cases rely heavily on technology. That's why we've had to invest what we have. Devices are fully encrypted now. I know companies like Apple, where we might used to be able to not recover information off of a device, we used to be able to write a warrant and get information from the backup cloud. But it is my understanding that they are going to encrypt the backup cloud here shortly, and we will not even be able to get it from there. We fully search. Oh, I apologize.
I'll let you talk some more. There's going to be lots of questions.
I apologize.
Lots of questions. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. We're going to get to member questions, get this discussion going further with next from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Chairwoman. If I might, let me just let you continue your thought then.
Now I may have lost it. So,
Okay. Well, then let me.
So the encryption of the iCloud and the encryption of the backup. What I will say is we search more than 200 cell phones a year with warrants. We fully cannot access 50% of them. About 20% of them, we have to use software such as Gray Key to break the encryption on the phones. The other 30% we're able to access. So there is a tremendous amount of evidence on phones and in social media accounts that we can't access as good as we are at it. And we have more resources than most agencies.
Well, one of the things you said, and thank you all for being here, and thanks for this roundtable. We've done a lot of work on this over the years, and it is frustrating that things are always seem to be one step ahead of us. And we've talked a lot about the analogs. I know that Mr. Latta has worked hard on trying to schedule fentanyl analogs. But you actually talked about new platforms that are arising rapidly. And that's the first time I've heard of that. Is that one of the things you've encountered?
Yeah, I was actually just informed this morning that a drug trafficking organization that we have run prior investigations on and thought we knew how they were communicating with each other were found to be communicating on a new electronic platform that we had no idea existed. And I don't even know that I could repeat the name of it to you here now because it was one I had never heard of before.
And then would these new platforms, would they fall under Section 230 protection? And let me ask our lawyers that are here.
If it's a platform that engages in the publication of user-to-user content, then I can assure you if it's doing something bad and a lawyer tries to hold them accountable, the first thing they're going to do is say that they're immune from liability.
Well, Sheriff, let me just ask you this, because, and I don't have a background in law enforcement. I do have a background in healthcare. There are frequently in law enforcement, you will do stings. You will, I won't say entice people to do things, but you can capture information real time by someone posing as someone else on a Snapchat platform. Is that not correct?
That is correct. In the instances where we have an informant, yes, and the informant, if a cooperating source, they can take screenshots, they can give us access to their phones and things like that. But even on some of those platforms, it's even temporary to them and that device. So unless we have that overt cooperation, we run into complications. When we start talking about running investigations into drug trafficking organizations. Historically, back when I was working in narcotics, we did, wire cases, Title III cases, where we could actually real time listen to phone calls being made from the suspect to other suspects that we didn't know. Well, the problem with using some of these online platforms is we can't get real-time monitoring, and we can't get identification of, if they're talking to our source of information, we can get it. But we used to be able to see the other people they were making phone calls to and hear it, but we can't get that anymore.
Then do you get cooperation from, say, your federal partners at DEA or FBI, where you can network a number of these nodes and try to build the case or collect the data on where it's happening? I mean, look, if these were random shooters in malls, we'd invoke everything that we had at our disposal. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you get the cooperation from DEA and FBI as far as assembling the data? If you capture it on a screenshot as an individual who's Snapchatting or telegramming with someone, do you get are you able to access the federal law enforcement networks?
Yes, we actually are an embedded task force with both the FBI, and we work very closely with the DEA, but the reality of it is the DEA and the FBI, they don't have access to that information either.
So the very famous case from San Bernardino, California, a few years back was having to unencrypt the phone that they finally got from the people who were responsible for a mass crime. Were there any, did law enforcement, were they able to establish any parameters where that de-encryption could take place?
No, sir. In fact, right now, I just actually have to pay an annual fee to a company called Gray Key that has been moderately successful at breaking the encryption on those phones. And again, that's about our 50% success rate.
All right, I see my time's expired. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, to your participation today. Oh, and let me just ask one general question. The chairman referenced some, or Ms. Garrett, I guess you had some documents, some data. I would just ask committee staff if they could share that with us, because that seemed like that was pretty important stuff. Thank you.
Well, the gentleman's time's expired, and I will ask my line of questions right now. First, I want to thank our witnesses for being here. Unfortunately, this is a testimony we've heard before, and it's not getting any better. And, we, as a committee, we want to make sure that we are making things better. And so that's why it's so important for your testimony today, and we appreciate it. And it's very difficult for you to be here. We need to hear your testimony. The people have to hear your testimony. Sheriff, I could start with you. In another life, when I was in the Ohio legislature, I chaired judiciary committees. And the thing that worries me is when I hear that there's nothing we can do. And because again, that's what we're here for. We're here to try to get something done. But, just some of the points you brought up about discovery on evidence and social media, the equipment upgrades that you have to do as a sheriff, the non-retaining of that data, being responsive to the legal process, the encryption. But, coming right back to that overall statement that you made, and I put 3 stars by it, nothing federal drug enforcement can do. But you added this, though. You're calling it homicide, you're calling it murder. To me, and in another life, there's something that we have to do. So how, if you had that magic crystal ball right now, and you looked into it in the future, how are we going to fix it?
Well,
especially when we're talking about murder.
It is. We have to do something about the flow of illicit fentanyl into this country. I think it's a well-established fact that most of the fentanyl that we see in the United States is coming from China through the Mexican cartels and brought in that way. We are not doing enough to stop the flow of fentanyl into our country. And as unpopular as this might be politically, I'm willing to say that we are facing such a threat and that most American families are being touched by fentanyl in some way, very negatively, that I think we should revisit harsher punishments for people who are distributing fentanyl in the United States. Some reason for the last 5 years, it has become more and more fashionable in some circles to be understanding of people who are distributing drugs. Now, I firmly believe that we need to do everything we can to help people who are addicted. We are sorely lacking in resources for people who are addicted in this country, particularly to fentanyl. However, I have no compassion for people who knowingly distribute fentanyl, knowing how lethal it is, knowing how it destroys lives of those that it doesn't kill. We have to be serious and make significant penalties for people who will distribute these drugs in our communities.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Griffith from Virginia and I have the halt fentanyl legislation to make it, permanently make fentanyl a Schedule 1. And so it's important that we get there. If I could ask Ms. Goldberg a question. When you look at you wrote down about the Snapchat reaction, what are you finding when you talk to them on this? Because again, it's happening on their platform, and it's been called murder. And so when you talk about a felony 1, or in Ohio, you're talking about aggravated murder. What are we talking? What's the reaction?
The reaction is one of hubris. They don't feel that they can be held liable. They blame the parents. They.
Okay, let's back up for a second. Okay, how are they blaming the parents? It's on their platform.
Right. Well, it doesn't make sense to me because the product doesn't let parents see what their kids are doing. But this is it's actually a refrain that their lawyers use. Is that this isn't our fault. We're just a neutral intermediary. Kids are going to be making mistakes. It's the cost of doing business, and really it's on the parents to be in charge. That's actually a very classist sentiment, because it's not as though parents can be looking over, even in the best of circumstances, be looking over the phones and the shoulders of every single one of their children at all times.
Well, thank you very much. My time has expired, and our next member to ask questions is the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having them over here on the end, and I appreciate, Ms. Neville, you being here, and I have a question in a couple of minutes for you. But first, to the sheriff, is any platform getting it right? Is there somebody out there we should look at, and if you have issues with, I guess if they're getting it right, the people aren't using them. But are there some models that we could have to say this is the standard?
Well, I will say that generally Facebook is very responsive to our court processes, things like that. Now, that doesn't mean that they're perfect, but it's better than a lot. Instagram as well. What we do find, though, is the people who are using these platforms for illicit purposes, as soon as they realize that these platforms are cooperating with law enforcement, they will jump to a different platform. They learn. They're business people. They understand what they have to do to stay in business. So, again, you'll see where, they may have an account on Snapchat, on Facebook, on Instagram, but they won't conduct their illicit activity there. They'll point people to their account on some of those other platforms. So it's short-lived when they find out that these platforms are cooperating with law enforcement. They will go somewhere else.
Thanks, and that kind of leads me to my next question. Ms. Goldberg and Ms. Marquez-Garrett from the legal side, one of you, I can't remember which, it's hard to kind of hear over here in the corner, but talked about executives and legal responsibility. So, it's clear to me, it seems to be clear that there's executives with platforms that are purely running criminal enterprises and allowing them to happen. The executives may not be, but allowing them to happen. Then you got, I guess what you just said with Facebook and others, where they're trying to do it right. The question always in the law, and we have to define it, is is usually not that clear. I mean, it's clear who needs to go to jail. It's clear who's trying to do it right. Sometimes it moves forward. And so how would you define, I think it might have been you, Ms. Goldberg, but both of you, if you're going to hold the executives accountable who are running the platform, where do you know when they go from running a platform that people are taking advantage of into negligence, and how would you kind of define that out?
So there are platforms that are just in the business of doing malicious activity, like sanctioned suicide. That's just in the business of guiding people to suicide. But then there are social media platforms that, like Snap, where they know about a frequent, consistent, and known problem that's just reoccurring. And when it's an illegal one, then we have to say that they have a heightened responsibility to fix it. These are the most well-resourced companies in our country. They have billions of dollars. They have the most sophisticated technology talent working for them. They can solve these problems if they want to. And I think that's why it's so important to put this on the executive's radar, because nobody feels the pain. No single person ever feels responsibility for these problems, because the teams that work on every single problem are so massive.
Yeah, I agree with you. And instead of Ms. Marquez-Garrett, I want to go to Ms. Neville, but I agree with you. We've got to, there's some that clearly are abusing the system. Always in law is how you define where it crosses over, and that's what we have to get right. But I want to give Ms. Neville a few minutes.
Yes, so I would just add, in our legal system, there are also certain corporate protections, and when you couple that with 230, you have individuals who feel as though they don't have to take responsibility for these issues.
That's the issue. We have to make sure 230 doesn't just give them carte blanche. Right. We have to make sure.
And there's also a complete lack of transparency with these companies. So unlike other companies that are regulated, that provide information on their systems, their processes, these companies do not. Mm-hmm. And it makes it incredibly difficult to figure out who knew what and when. Okay. But so what we do know are things like they say, more content moderation, but they say they don't have an obligation.
We have to.
Right? We have to hold them to their representations, and we have to go behind what they're saying.
I want to get to Ms. Neville. Thanks a lot. I know that you said, and thank you for being here, that's how your son lives on, and that's how we learn.
I have left.
But you have just a few seconds. You said at the end of your thing you had some other things to share. I was going to give you some time to.
Oh, my goodness. I appreciate that. So
probably just one thing now.
I'll just tell you real quick. We did about 9 months of research interviewing experts on the subject, and we published a paper back in September, The Best Practices to Rid Social Media of Drug Trafficking. I brought a few copies. I'm happy to email it out to whoever wants it, but the suggestions are in this, and I can always elaborate on those. And these suggestions actually don't even involve legislation. They involve a lot of accountability, so I'm happy to give these out and then send it out to anybody else who doesn't get one.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm out of time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and our next member is the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Ms. Neville, thank you for your testimony. I know it was tough. There are people watching this. I will tell you, this is the second time we've heard of a young person dying in this month, where we've had the parents in to discuss it. I took the opportunity to text my 22, 17, and 15-year-olds and just said, don't go there. Don't get anything, A, illegal, but B, it's not from a legitimate pharmacy or from legitimate sources, because you don't know what's going to be in it. And so I'm sorry for your loss. Hopefully my children won't be the only ones who their awareness is heightened to this. Now, because of serving on this committee, they usually roll their eyes when I start talking about it, but I do think it's important that as parents, we all talk about it, and grandparents.
Well, if you need that third-party validation with your kiddos, call me. I'm there.
All right, I appreciate it. And it's not just, so often we think, and sometimes the American public thinks that, this is big city problem or this is not us. Mr. Latta mentioned earlier that he and I have introduced the HALT Act, which deals with fentanyl analogs. We're still working on some of the language, but we're hoping to have this thing worked out. Probably should have been passed last year, but we're going to get it passed this year. And so we did a statement when we released that earlier this week, and I received this from a community leader, a public figure, saying that he had received it and then said nice things about it, and then went on to tell me why this was important to him. And I'm now going to read from, without identifying him, because I didn't ask him for permission, but I will read from his email. My wife is a high school principal. Now, this is a rural area of Virginia. My wife is a high school principal. She has to wear latex gloves to search lockers for fear of fentanyl. And she has had to administer Narcan in order to save a student's life. Tell Morgan thanks. Thank everybody in this committee. We're working hard. We're not going to solve all the problems, but we're going to try, and we appreciate you all being here today to help us in our efforts to try to solve these problems. But when you have a good rural county where most of the folks, think this is not their problem, and yet the high school principal has to wear gloves to search lockers and has used Narcan, this is a national emergency. It is a national problem, and we're leading the charge, and everybody in here knows we've got to do something, but the American people need to know that we have got to take action, and in all fairness, this administration needs to understand that they need to take action across the board, but particularly on the southern border, where we know a lot of this garbage and poison that's coming into our communities is coming across the border and coming into the United States. Somebody's going to have to help me on time because I can't see. All right, look back here. I got a little bit left. It's a whole lot bigger, Ms. Goldberg, and I know you only have a handful of cases. Not everybody wants to go public, and I understand that. But it's a lot bigger than the 8 cases you're currently involved in and the 3 others that you know. I mean, it's probably tens of thousands every day across the country that are exposed, at least, to this issue. And so I appreciate the work you're doing. Sheriff, thank you so much for what you're doing. Appreciate it. Is there something else that we in this committee can do? We don't have judiciary, so we can't create new crimes, but we can try to work on policies. There's something else we need to be doing that we haven't looked at to your knowledge?
Well, and I think that you have referred to it, and everybody here has talked about it a little bit, but if there could be some regulations that compel these companies, these social media platforms to, be in compliance with court orders. We're not looking to violate people's privacy rights in this country.
And is your experience that it's just Snapchat? Because I've heard of other problems too.
No, it is certainly not just Snapchat.
They're just the worst according to our witnesses. Okay.
Yes.
Unfortunately, my time is up. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The next member to ask questions this morning is the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and I appreciate the testimony from the witnesses, particularly Amy. Thank you so very much for sharing this story, and I'm so sorry to hear about your son. I do want to share some stories because, again, we've got to remove the stigma. This could happen with any family. And my friend over here, Morgan, is right. We've got to talk to our kids. And I try to do it on a regular basis. And it is not just a Snapchat. It's all these social medias, and I have some examples here that I want to share. I have a story here from my congressional district in Florida. A 35-year-old resident of Hudson named Zach had been successfully living in recovery for many years after struggling with addiction in his youth. Sadly, in June of 2022, he relapsed and overdosed on fentanyl-laced drugs. And I want to ask the sheriff too. He talked about drugs. Every drug is laced with fentanyl. Does that include, I assume that includes marijuana, because marijuana is a drug. He can address that a little later. But Zach was a beloved son, brother, and uncle. During the police investigation to his death, it was discovered that Zach had purchased a deadly fentanyl-laced product through Facebook Messenger. Another story from my district in Pasco County in Florida again. The sheriff's office investigated an overdose death investigation in Holiday, Florida. The victim, Dwayne, was found dead in his work van, where law enforcement found a hypodermic needle that contained liquid fentanyl in the immediate area. Dwayne's cell phone was also located within the immediate area, and upon review of its contents, recent narcotic-related communication was observed again through Facebook Messenger. The communication messages revealed the facilitation of narcotics and a meeting location from 2 days before. It also included instructions to obtain the drugs in a parked car. The medical examiner's report revealed he'd overdosed on fentanyl. I wish these stories were unique, but sadly, as Morgan said, we know they are not. And in each of the cases, they were flagged to my office from our local sheriffs. They also used Facebook Messenger to obtain and facilitate the drug deal. Back in 2018, I questioned Mark Zuckerberg directly about the illegal sales of opioids through online ads of pharmacies. He talked about the need for tools to go after this type of content proactively. But that was 5 years ago, and the problem has gotten much, much worse. There's no doubt that big tech is not doing enough to curb this problem, and you've stated that. I believe federal law enforcement also needs to do a better job of coordinating and responding to emerging threats. The DEA, for example, is not taking this problem seriously enough, and there's a disconnect on both sides. This is why Congress and I introduced the Capture Act, which would require reporting and federal recommendations on ways social media companies can better communicate, consult, and coordinate with law enforcement at every level, federal, state, and local. And I want to again commend the chairperson for holding this roundtable. We're not waiting to organize. We're holding these very serious roundtables, and I appreciate this being a priority of this committee. And I think we may need a comprehensive bill on this particular issue. Sheriff Nowels, can you answer that one question with regard to marijuana? Is that being laced as well? And can you tell us what your coordination is with social media companies, if any? What does a typical process look like for receiving privately held information from social media? And one more question. Do you have recommendations for how companies and agencies such as yours across the country can improve communication to quickly respond to drug sales?
So in response to the question about do we see fentanyl-laced marijuana, I do not have any specific examples. In the state of Washington, marijuana is legal and controlled, so there's probably a lot less likelihood that stuff sold over the counter, so to speak, would be laced with it. Can marijuana be laced with fentanyl? Absolutely, and we still do have a black market and a gray market for marijuana in the state of Washington, even though it is legal, and you will certainly find it there in those markets for sure. What a typical process might look like, and again, this is not just for narcotics investigations, it's for all criminal investigations that might involve a social media platform. Typically, if we know we're going to be finding information on a platform, we will immediately send out a preservation letter to the company, which lets them know whatever data you have, we need you to preserve. Sometimes they comply with it, sometimes they don't. A lot of times with that preservation letter comes a request that they do not disclose to the owner of that account that we are looking at it. Sometimes they comply. I will tell you that a lot of times Facebook and Snapchat will comply with the preservation and they will not notify the platform user. However, they will shut down the account, which really in a kind of backdoor way lets them know that somebody's looking at their data because all of a sudden their account's shut down and they're not told why. So that can be a challenge as well, particularly if we're trying to look at any ongoing evidence we might find. And then we will then have our either investigative analysts who I have given special commissions to because of their expertise. They will write the search warrant for the data, the historical data if it's there. And then depending on whatever the platform's policy is, we can get a return anywhere from 60 to 90 to 180 days later, even though our court orders in the state of Washington, and particularly in Spokane County, say we have 10 days for the return of service, which we have to do a return of service that says, well, we're waiting on the information. So it can take quite a bit of time to get that information back. And then it can take, if the data that we receive exists, which many times we're told it doesn't exist, but a lot of times we'll get it back and it will be encrypted, and not even the service provider has the encryption key. It has end-to-end encryption. So the data is useless to us.
And I will add that I am aware of one instance of somebody dying from fentanyl-laced marijuana. We simply see it's much more rare than other drugs.
Well, thank you very much, and the gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you for yielding to me. I'm a little bit speechless because having lost a grandchild, not the same conditions that you did, Ms. Neville, I think only someone who has lost a child or a grandchild can know the pain that is inflicted, a pain that never goes away, a pain that is exacerbated by what seems like such a senseless cause. And so I'm humbled by your willingness to tell your story. While you were talking, I was moved. I have a freshman in college that's an athlete. He's a swimmer. They are constantly in pain because they stress their bodies in ways that others don't. And I texted him and I said, look, I know you're constantly in pain, but don't ever take a pain medication that you get from someone else. If you're in that much pain, you come and talk to us. We will figure out how to get you what you need. Don't do this. And so I was moved by that. And to the rest of you, in defining the battle space that we're in addressing this problem, because it's heartbreaking. And the devastating reality is we're losing our young people in droves. I heard someone give a statistic recently that about every 2 weeks, we have the equivalent of 9/11. About every 2 weeks across the nation, we're losing nearly 3,000 of our young people as a result of this. My district is no stranger to the dangers of fentanyl. I represent Appalachian, Ohio. It's a part of our nation that's been particularly devastated by the opioid crisis, now exacerbated by fentanyl. So we're actually quite familiar with it. And as I mentioned last week, we lawmakers, for us, it's critical for us to talk with families and individuals who've been affected by fentanyl, and with public health officials and the first responders who have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, so that we better understand what the challenges are to keep this drug out of the hands of our young people. Combating the crisis is going to take all of us uniting around common cause policies or common sense policies that'll mitigate the havoc that fentanyl is causing. And conversations like this one that we're having here today are so critical. They're good starting points in helping us move forward in that common goal, keeping fentanyl out of our communities. It's also critical, that let out smoke. So I don't know what happened. Yeah. We better call the electricians because it sparked fire. And now it smells. So we got to understand what the role of big tech is in this crisis, not only to the challenges to preventing access, but how dealers are accessing our kids through social media and these platforms, and they must be held accountable. They can't claim to be tech providers, and yet they're providing content and directing the traffic. They can't do both. That's why Section 230 reform is so critical. The internet is a valuable tool, but as parents and grandparents, we know that we got to do a better job. So, sorry for rambling, but I'm passionate about these things, and I look forward to continuing this very important conversation. Sheriff, what advice do you have for smaller enforcement departments like in Appalachia, very small police departments that may not have access to the same tools or technology that you would in your county, more sophisticated urban or metropolitan law enforcement agencies might have to combat this thing? What can small communities do?
So I think it's important to have strong relationships with federal partners because typically that is where you would go for technical expertise. A lot of their analysts have the ability to help here. So a strong relationship with some of your local federal officers or with a larger jurisdiction that does have access to those. We provide regional services to all of the agencies throughout Eastern Washington, which has been very useful to some of our smaller jurisdictions. And we're happy to do it because we know the challenges that we have just keeping the expertise in-house. So I think those relationships are very, very important.
Mr. Chairman, I was distracted by the fireworks. If I could ask one more quick question. I believe that the ability to freely innovate comes with the incredible responsibility of ensuring that your product doesn't cause more harm than good. So in regards to this fentanyl discussion, Ms. Marquez-Garrett and Ms. Goldberg, from your experience, what are some of the things that we can do in Congress? And I know some of them are kind of top line. What can we do from a policy perspective to assist in the battle of holding big tech accountable for the harm that they're causing to our users?
Yes, so first I'd like to say that you just said a word that's very critical here, which is product, right? So Section 230 relates to content. It relates to third parties. Many of these issues we're talking about when we refer to Snapchat, these are product issues. These go to the design of the product. In fact, I'd like to say, communicating versus connecting. So we do have children who meet these dealers in person, and then they communicate through other apps like Facebook Messenger. The Snapchat app, what we are seeing that is fundamentally different is this element of connecting. So in cases where these children, these are children, right? 13, 14 years old, they don't have vehicles. They're in school Monday through Friday. They're at home with their parents on the weekend. And so at least for us, the fundamental difference here, the product defect is it's connecting these children to these dealers. It's giving them access. So I think and I'll turn to Carrie in terms of legislation and other efforts, but some of this we can already do with what's in place. We just need to hold Snap and other companies that are doing this accountable. We need to be able to get answers to questions.
Yeah.
I will add that we need carve-outs in Section 230. People need to be able to sue for catastrophic injuries. It's nice to have Sheriff Nowels here, who is taking a really proactive stance against the dealers, but we also need to empower people like Amy, who lost everything, to go after another party that's responsible, which is the platform.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the indulgence.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana, Dr. Bouchung, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank full committee chair McMorris Rodgers for hosting the roundtable. to highlight and discuss the reality that illicit drugs like fentanyl are being advertised and sold to Hoosiers in Indiana and across the country online on social media platforms. I have 4 kids. My kids are older. They're 30, 28, 25, and 19, and I've been messaging to them for about 15 years or more about the risks of this, and hopefully it's been effective. It has so far. But I want to say this, it's not only young children, but adult children that are at risk, not only on social media, but just directly texting. A Wall Street Journal just outlined a story about 3 professionals, the age of my kids, who got drugs they thought was cocaine, and it had fentanyl in it. They all died. They were in their 20s. So, you know, everybody has a case in their district, right? More than one. I have a 19-year-old woman, Elizabeth Duncan, lost her life to fentanyl and fentanyl poisoning from counterfeit prescription pills that she got from a dealer online who was advertising fentanyl, marijuana, and firearms, believe it or not, on Snapchat. One of many cases. So it's up to the people in this room to come up with meaningful and effective solutions so we can protect children in my district in Indiana and communities across America from these dangers and hold these platforms accountable. So, Ms. Laura Marquez-Garrett, I understand machine learning has played a central role in many of these social media platforms' efforts to detect drug-related content, such as advertisement for counterfeit pills that could be laced with fentanyl. Can you tell us about these programs and how effective are they in really detecting drug-related content? And can they identify content directed to users of different ages?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of pieces to that. Let me start with sort of the technology that's out there. What we have started learning since the Facebook whistleblower came forward from Ms. Haugen, as well as engineers and others in the field, is that these social media companies, they do have that ability to identify, for example, drug content, words, images, gun content, all of that. The way the technology is designed, it's sort of like a lever, if you will, where you can program it for safety, which also gets false positives. You may get too much of the content, and you'll then have to go back, and you may have irritated users because you've taken down something that is not violating. Or you can program it on the lower end here for engagement, right? And engagement, you end up not capturing all of this. You know, fundamentally, these are the most sophisticated tech companies in the world. They have the ability to capture all of this. They have the ability to turn that dial up to safety, and they choose not to. I think the other issue, and if you could remind me, so that's sort of the AI piece. I think you asked another part of that question as well.
Yeah, I mean, basically that, you answered that question. I mean, can they identify users based on age? Of course,
yes.
People lie online about how old they are, right?
Yes, so that was the second part. Yes, they can, and there's a couple of pieces to that as well. One is there is the technology out there that can identify age. That is a technology available. These companies choose not to use it. It can do a basic facial recognition and estimate age in a matter of seconds without pulling identification information. So there's not a privacy concern there. The companies choose not to use that, but even not using that, these companies, some more than others, collect incredible amounts of data on every user. Tens of thousands of data points that these companies are constantly collecting and sharing. They have the ability to estimate age. You have photos that are being put up that show 8, 10-year-old children. And even without those photos and the content, we have children who say on their public profiles, I'm 10 years old. And those public profiles stay up. But in addition to that, they also have the technology to take those data points and to determine this is most likely a 10-year-old. And I know at least some of these companies, Meta included, actually use that type of technology for marketing purposes.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I apologize for the sparks. This has been very enlightening and disheartening in some ways. But your willingness, all of you, who have been involved with this in unique ways is special for us. This is partially email that I just sent to my 3 grandkids in Illinois, 2 teenagers and a 10-year-old, and their father and mother, so they will know what I sent. But I expressed that I was sitting in a hearing in Energy and Commerce talking about social media, big tech, and fentanyl, and indicated to them that fentanyl is making its way from the Mexico border to our nation's young people via social media platforms. Instead of cruising the streets, teenagers can find pills by watching a 30-second video on TikTok or logging on to Snapchat. This is dangerous enough, but on top of that, an increasing number of these drugs are actually counterfeits laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. I love you too much to have this impact your life. Drug dealers and those seeking to buy illicit substances often use ever-changing code words on social media in order to avoid flags from content moderators, while straightforward hashtags or use of drug names in videos usually get taken down. Changing one letter to a symbol or using emojis helps evade the algorithm. Now, I'm assuming that my grandkids probably know this already.
Yeah.
Their grandfather now appears to be a guy that just finally come to understand what they know already. Ms. Marquez-Garrett, excuse me, how do you recommend that big tech keep up with these tactics in order to better take down drug accounts and protect my grandkids online?
So as a starting point, they turn up the dial, right? This is their programming. It's their product design. They turn up that dial for safety instead of turning it down for engagement. That would be that would make a huge difference. Additionally, when it comes to children, particularly minors, Snap, for example, in their terms, they say if you're under 18, you must have the consent of a parent to use our app. That is not enforced in any way, shape, or form. There is no easy way as a parent to report it. It's as simple as an opt-out list. If every parent were able to simply call or email Snap and say, this is my cell phone, I've purchased this. This is the device ID. This device must be blocked from Snapchat access. My child does not have my permission. Those numbers would drop, but so would social media engagement. They'd make less money because many, many children would not be on these apps in the first place. These companies, I'll add one more point, they don't even have a 1-800 number. We have a client who literally drove to Snap's physical address because she was trying to report a dealer who killed her son. She could not get through to anyone. She could not find a 1-800 number. She drove to Snap's offices.
Could she get in the door?
No, she could not. In fact, she spoke with Snap security and was asked to move her car or it would be towed. She was told this is not a retail store. You need an appointment to speak with someone. Only there's no way to make an appointment. These products, these procedures, these companies have set it up so that parents have no possible way to protect their children.
Yeah. Even when accounts selling drugs are found and taken down, there's little stopping the criminals from just creating a new email address and starting an account under another name. It feels like a game of whack-a-mole. And Sheriff, what are some effective tools big tech platforms should be using to stop this from happening? And I guess the final is why aren't they?
Well, I will echo what Ms. Marquez said, is they have the ability to store the data that we are looking for. They have the ability to monitor and track the traffic that's going across their platform. They seemingly can know everything there is to know about me as a private citizen, what I like, what I want, and what I want to buy. It is ridiculous to think that they don't possess the same ability to identify people who are using their platforms for illicit purposes. They do, but they have to be forced to do it. They have to be forced to comply with lawful court orders. They must be forced to retain the data that they know might be useful in a criminal prosecution. I'm not asking them to give it to law enforcement for free, but please be responsive to a court order. And they're just not.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. This is extremely important. I believe that Representative Griffith mentioned just a little while ago, this is the second parent we've had this month, is it? Yes, this month. Sheriff, you are absolutely right. We've got to secure that border. It baffles me that Republican, Democrat, Independent, north, south, east, west, how can we not see that? There is enough fentanyl in this country right now to kill 7 billion people. Unbelievable. And you are absolutely right as well that there needs to be more stringent penalties. I don't care whose feelings are hurt. This needs to happen. Ms. Neville, father of 3 sons, grandfather of 6 grandchildren, I can only imagine. I can't tell you. I wish I could articulate. I wish I could put in words, but I can't. But I want to ask you this. You mentioned, and please forgive me if this is too difficult, but you mentioned that the paramedics came, that your husband did CPR and paramedics came and they administered the Narcan. How long was it?
It's hard to tell. I just know that the last time that I saw Alex alive was 9 p.m. the night before.
The last time
I saw Alex alive was 9 p.m.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you don't know the time.
I don't know.
Okay, well, maybe that's not the best example, though, but I want to talk about Narcan because you can get Narcan without a prescription now, but we left it up to the states, and a lot of states have it behind the counter. And I'm a pharmacist, so, you have to come to the counter and you have to get it that way. Now, the FDA, as critical as we are of them, with good reason, they are actually taking proactive steps to come up and try to get Narcan over the counter where you can get it without having to go to the pharmacy. I don't want any barriers. Look, this is such a problem now. Narcan should be just like Ipecac syrup. It ought to be in every medicine cabinet in America right now.
I agree. It should be in every first aid kit. I do want to point out, too, that Narcan is just one of the brands. What everybody really wants to get their hands on is naloxone, and there's different brands out there. And we need stronger because we know it takes more than just one hit of that naloxone to save somebody. So there's other brands out there. I encourage everybody to go look them up and find one that you can get in your medicine cabinet as soon as possible.
And if I may agree, every household in America should have this in their home.
Absolutely, just like we have
Yes.
the monitors and
Even if you only have small children, I had someone recently tell me, because mine are all very young, even if it's not your children you're concerned about, it could be your neighbor, it could be a friend.
I couldn't agree with you more. And look, we sit here and we ask you, what can we do? And Sheriff, you make great points, and both of our legal friends make good points here. Yeah, we got to do something about 230. It's a heavy lift. We don't want to suppress freedom of speech, but at the same time, if we don't do something, I've always said, if you don't do something, you're doing something. And if we don't do something, we're doing something, and that is ignoring it. We can no longer ignore this. But the point about the Narcan, Mr. Chairman, and this is, we have jurisdiction over the FDA. Now, I will compliment them. They have been proactive. They've already started the packaging for it to be OTC, and they're waiting for the companies to apply for it to be OTC. We need to have, the next meeting we have like this, instead of having a third parent who's lost a child, we need the FDA in here. What can we do to get that done next week? It needs to be done ASAP. Sheriff, you're right. We got to close that border. We got to have the penalties. We got to do something about the platforms. But this is such an immediate problem and such an epidemic right now that we can do something on this committee. We can get the FDA in here. We can get Narcan OTC. We can get it in medicine cabinets across this country, and it needs to be. When we were growing up, we had syrup of Ipecac. You had that in every medicine cabinet for poison. Now we got to have Narcan. So I'm appealing, Mr. Chairman, we need to have the FDA here. That needs to be the next step. And they are, again, to their credit, they are doing everything they can. They're expediting the process, but we need to see what we can do. to help them expedite that process.
I'm going to give you one thing about that process. So my understanding is this spring we should be seeing an over-the-counter version. However, it is only going to be a 2 milligram or a 3 milligram. Like I said, we know that the minimum 4 milligram is not enough right now. So putting the over-the-counter at a 2 or 3 milligram is giving us a false sense of security. So what we need is a higher dose available over-the-counter. So that's what you can do.
Thank you. Thank you for that input. And again, thank all of you for being here. Ms. Neville, thank you so much for being here. And I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. And let's see, it's Dr. I think I had to step out, Dr. Dunn.
Dr. Dunn?
Oh, Dr. Dunn. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was
sorry.
looking up naloxone. I was looking up naloxone on my pharmacy after Buddy gave that impassioned speech. I wanted to make sure there weren't any contraindications to it. Well, give me just 1 second. I'll get back to my questions here. So I thought what I'd do, actually, since the panel has so thoroughly answered the questions I prepared, Dan Crenshaw had some pretty good ideas. We were whispering back and forth. I think he texted you guys. And so this is for the sheriff. Currently, we understand, I'm not a Snapchat person, but I understand that there's no way for the users to report violations of community guidelines specific to selling drugs. I mean, but they do have that mechanism. So a box on the Snapchat that said reporting somebody for dealing drugs on Snapchat, that would be possible, I believe. And if that was automatically referred to law enforcement, I think that would be a powerful incentive for Snapchat to include or to police their site. What do you think, Sheriff?
Well, I certainly think that would be possible. It would be hard to anticipate how much that would be used, depending on whether people recognize it for what it is and where people.
That's a reason for parents to go on Snapchat, right?
That is correct. So yes, it would be effective, and hopefully at that point it would be nice if the platform, whichever platform that is, would automatically start retaining data on that account to give us time to get to it through a legal process.
We have a lot of people have talked about scheduling the fentanyl analogs in Schedule 1. That would make them illegal. That's good. We could also classify them as a matter of statute as poisons, which would then, as I understand, and I'm not a lawyer, as I understand, that would confer the possibility of prosecuting drug dealers for homicide. Is that correct?
So in the state of Washington right now, we do have a statute, for controlled substance homicide. The challenge is that usually everything we're going after is latent data that's on the phone, and we're trying to recover after the fact. And the standard of proof we end up having to overcome with our prosecutors is the dose that the individual took. We have to prove that particular dose came from this particular person at a specific time.
It's never as easy as we on TV, huh?
It's exceptionally challenging. And again, with a 50% success rate of actually getting into the phone of the person who died, boy, we have a lot of challenges, and it's very tough to get a successful prosecution there.
I've filed again this Congress a bill to classify the analogs of fentanyl, all of them, as weapons of mass destruction, which actually gives the law enforcement some extra things that they can do using DHS and whatnot. Also, international policing becomes somewhat easier. And to follow on that is a suggestion that Dan gave, and I urge you to remember this is Dan, give you a suggestion, but I was amused that it came from him. He has introduced a bill to authorize use of military force against the cartels. That would seem to have. That I know that's pretty much of a reach there, but I was tickled when I read it, and I thought I'd share it.
Can I make one little comment? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
It works.
But I want to go back to the legislative piece. I know we're not going
Please do.
to, I don't want to get into the weeds with legislation here, but two things I just want to put a bug in your ear about that would address the issues that, and it will help law enforcement in their investigations is the, Rick Scott has the Social Media Act, and then there's also the Cooper Davis Act. Both of these have components that address the law enforcement piece, so that are really important. So keep your ear out for those, and hopefully you guys will take a hard look at
Well,
that.
thank you all for coming and sharing. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, this goes back to accountability to these companies. So you mentioned in-app reporting. Snapchat does have an in-app reporting button. In fact, one of our parents met with a Snap executive in 2021, learned about this feature and was told you can report dealers through here. She then reported 10 dealers. Those dealers were not taken down. And in the documents, I'll make sure everyone has a copy of these. In one instance, for example, there was a public posting beating all tickets, prices go hit the telly. This is a dealer. And she received back from Snapchat, thanks for reporting something in the app. It helps us protect the Snapchat community. We wanted to let you know that we looked into your report and have found that it does not violate our community guidelines. There are hundreds of stories of people trying to use the in-app reporting mechanism only to be ignored or to be told it doesn't report our guidelines.
Yeah, so I think there's some real traction to be had there. Well, thank you for that input. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, so we've rightly so talked a lot about kids. I'd like to point out that Utah has the highest birth rate in the country. My district has the highest birth rate per capita hospital in my district. The U.S. Census data says that we have the highest household size and the highest number of children in the country in my district. Simply put, we love kids in Utah. I'm a good example. I have 6 kids and 15 grandkids. And like my colleagues, some of them have pointed out how they've had discussions with their family. Last Sunday night, I sat down with as many of them as I could gather and talked about our previous hearing on fentanyl. And if nothing comes from this other than members of Congress and those that listen to this sit down with their families and have this discussion, that's a tremendous thing. And so as we talk about the responsibilities of these companies, I understand how unfair it is to place this burden on parents, but clearly the parents' opportunity to educate their kids and their grandkids is so important. So thank you for highlighting this. We'll have another discussion in the Curtis home on this. I'd like to explore a little bit more what the social media companies can do. And we've talked very little about algorithms. And those of you who are specialists on Section 230, I'd like to just for a minute get you to think outside the box. It seems to me that all the power that comes from these apps centers around algorithms and their ability to present data. We talked about the 10,000 data points based upon what these people will respond to. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't be focused a little bit more on algorithms. And one of the things I've thought in the past is a clear delineation on Section 230 that separates these people from the town square model is that they don't just post information. They decide what information is seen and magnified. And is it possible, as we look at Section 230, that we should be looking at this issue of the moment you evoke an algorithm, you lose your protection from Section 230? And I'd just be curious from those of you who spend time on this, what your thoughts are about that idea.
Yeah, and if I may, I think it's an amazing question. To be clear, social media is not the internet. And I think we confuse that often, right? The internet, as we know it, is sort of these town halls, these bulletin boards. It's a system that uses an algorithm, but often these search engines, those algorithms start by user input. I say, I want to see A, B, and C. That algorithm is designed to find A, B, and C. What is fundamentally different about social media algorithms, and I would distinguish that and say these companies, social media company algorithms, these algorithms are not designed by starting with user input. They are designed, and we've heard this from experts in the field, they are designed by starting with the ultimate goal these companies want to achieve.
Engagement.
Correct. And that is what makes social media algorithms harmful. Again, these companies, social media companies, these products are not the internet, and that is a huge and critical distinction.
Ms. Goldberg, I know you're jumping to...
Chomping
Yes,
at the bit.
I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, you know, things might really change in this area with the Gonzalez versus Google case that's coming before the Supreme Court. This will be the first time that a Section 230 case will ever have been heard since 1996 when this law came into fruition, and it is specifically looking at the targeting algorithm. And Section 230 was created to deal with content. Algorithms are a product feature. This is not content that users are creating, but it's the product matching users with content that they think they would like. And it's just wrong for these companies to have immunity when it comes to the content that they're feeding to people, regardless of who's creating it. It's a product feature that they're feeding this material to people.
So I'm running out of time, but I'd just like to plant this seed again, that one possible reform to 230 is the moment an algorithm is applied to engagement, you lose protection for Section 230.
I love it.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I want to thank you guys for being here and sharing your stories. I know how difficult that could be. And really, my only question is going to be to the sheriff. We do first responder tours in my district where I meet with all first responders, whether that's EMS, fire, or my police force, sheriffs, and local city police. And one thing that they encounter is fentanyl, whether they're treating someone in a wreck or arresting someone. And now they have to put on rubber gloves just to do a normal, even a Terry frisk. And in numerous instances, an officer of the law has been exposed to fentanyl through a normal search of that suspect, only to feel the effects when he got behind the wheel to drive that suspect back to the station. And without a Narcan on their body or in their possession to stop the effects of that overdose, they probably would have lost their lives. So what can we do? First off, do y'all have problems getting Narcan for your officers and all first responders in your county? And what can Congress do to assist you in making sure that those that are running toward the danger and not away from it are protected?
So thank you for that question. I never thought in my career that I would have to have a budget for naloxone, and I do. And to just give you an example of how frequently my deputies are using it, we had expended our supposed year's supply for naloxone in 2022 by the end of April. I had to go out and seek additional funding as we were finding that in some of our more urban areas, we were using as many as 14 Narcan doses a week. Now, some of that is because, as was stated earlier, we're having to give multiple doses of naloxone or Narcan to some of the overdose victims that we encounter. There is technology that exists that allows law enforcement to identify controlled substances without actually touching them, without actually having to use a field test kit, through some HIDA funding, high intensity drug trafficking area funding. 3 or 4 years ago, we were able to procure one machine, and that is for a population of 560,000 people and roughly 700 to 750 law enforcement officers in our county, and we have one machine.
It's not in the field with every officer, correct?
It absolutely is not. It is completely underutilized for the number of contacts and the number of times we come into contact with somebody in possession of a controlled substance. It would allow us to identify a substance as presumptive fentanyl without actually having to handle it, which is important. But gone are the days in law enforcement where you could field test a controlled substance and not worry a little bit about your safety. You're having to handle a substance that is best handled in a controlled lab and people, in hazardous material suits. And yet we're out there with latex gloves and, nothing preventing inhalation or anything like that. So making more of those pieces of equipment at $25,000 a piece available to officers out in the field, particularly those who might be out in rural areas and might not have access to backup. The problem with being exposed to fentanyl is you don't know it's happened until it's maybe too late, and it's hard to deliver that to yourself. Fortunately, we're an urban enough area that we can be around other people pretty quickly if we're starting to feel the effects. But in full disclosure, the reason we were allowed to carry naloxone was to self-administer if we're exposed. And yet we find we are delivering it to members of the public far more frequently than we are to ourselves.
At the detriment of those officers, possibly. And, I can just visualize someone in rural Washington State, because it's a rural area. I've been to Spokane and been out from Spokane. Officer pulls someone over, suspected drug user or trafficker, had fentanyl in his pocket, residue in his pocket. Officer frisks that suspect, gets exposed to a very tiny amount, all it takes. Processes the suspect, puts him in the back of the car, gets behind the wheel, and starts to feel the effects. Without the Narcan, it could be detrimental. So I've already texted my staff about, is there a federal grant program? Can we reallocate some existing federal grant program to assist law enforcement and first responders across the nation with being able to obtain, and it could be the manufacturer incentives, I don't know, to make sure that all you guys in the first responder field have access to that to save the officers' lives or to save the victim's life. So anyway, that's the only question I had. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the speakers today. I greatly appreciate it. Extremely important topic. So in Arizona, I represent parts of Phoenix and the suburbs of Phoenix. Obviously, we're a border state as well. And so we've had more than 2,000 opioid overdoses in 1 year in 2021. And also that year we had 52,000 opioid-related hospitalizations and emergency department visits. Huge issue. I put the blame on an open border, and I think the administration should also be more forceful with China on, importing, allowing the importing of these opioid, fentanyl especially. But obviously, you've also talked about how social media plays a role. And so I don't know, my question to any one of you is in 2021, Chairwoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers and now the Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan had some draft legislation on reforms for Section 230. And it basically got rid of the blanket liability protections for large businesses. I think it's still, if I remember, still protected smaller businesses. If you're familiar with that draft language, would that help the problem with the social media and drug traffickers using social media to get to our kids?
I am not familiar with that language, but I certainly plan to review it.
Yeah, I mean, anything that provides a blanket removal of immunity would go a long way. We're talking about our biggest platforms today as the ones that are responsible for the most fentanyl-related deaths. So if Section 230 is completely removed regarding, for those platforms, that would be, a huge improvement, and it would give parents who've lost everything the ability to hold these tech companies responsible, but it would also just signal to them, they would be incentivized to be cleaning up the act on their platforms. That said, there are small platforms that are doing the devil's work, maybe not specifically related to fentanyl, but you know, I own a small business. I own a law firm, and I have to, you know, I'm just as vulnerable to lawsuits if I do something wrong or if I harm somebody as a large law firm. And so, you know, we don't want to let evil companies off the hook just because they're small.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The other question I had, and you've touched upon it somewhat of what parents can do, but is there any way that a parent could totally prevent their child from, let's say, being on Snapchat? Is there any way to do that?
From being on it, they absolutely just have to not let them have it, and that would be the
Not
only way.
let them have a phone, or
not let them have Snapchat or any social media for that matter. But I can tell you that just because your kid doesn't have social media doesn't mean they're not exposed to it. You know, there's kids that get harmed. You know, there's these bullying groups on Instagram. I know a family personally that there's a very racist group on there, and somebody was posting pictures of their kid and saying horrible things about their kid on there. Their kid isn't on this platform. Their kid has nothing to do with it. They don't have social media on their phone, but one of their friends is like, hey, did you see this? And there they are. So it's still seeping into the home. It's still seeping into their life, even though you think you're doing everything you can to protect them from it.
And I would add that my answer would be no. We at SMVLC, we represent over 1,000 families of every political persuasion, every race, religion, background. And we have seen parents who have tried everything. No phone, they get a phone from a friend. We have children, I mean, you would have to ban devices in schools. We have parents who have had to forbid schools from giving their children devices because children know how to get around the Chromebook, for example. I had a 12-year-old explain to me how to copy the desktop so that you can bypass all protections. And my specialty in my prior practice was electronic discovery, and this was all new to me. So my answer would be no. Without some sort of an opt-out list, a 1-800 number, without these companies actively providing mechanisms to help parents, there is no way.
Well, thank you. That's, you know, it's really good insight because, you know, I don't use some of these social media apps and I don't have young kids anymore. So I'm thankful that you're here educating us on it because I believe we need to balance because social media apps can do good things too, right? So it can do good things. It can also cause bad things to happen. And I think as a Congress member, I need to balance that out and figure out ways that we can address this fentanyl problem through different aspects, whether that means reforming Section 230 or other ways. And so thank you for your input, and I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Dr. Joyce, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank the Chairwoman McMorris Rodgers for her continued focus on this issue. We talked about having parents, Mrs. Neville, and just 2 weeks ago, parents from my district, Deb and Ray Cullen, came who had just lost their son months ago from a fentanyl overdose. Fentanyl analogs continue to ravage our communities, harming families, your son, throughout America. Sheriff, I want to thank you for your comments. We listen keenly as you address us. We recognize that fentanyl analogs are pouring across our southern border. We recognize that those active components come from China to Mexico, and the majority of this poison, and that is what fentanyl is, this poison continues to come across our southern border. This will continue to be a crisis until we secure that southern border. It is imperative that safeguards are put in place to stop the spread of this deadly drug. I am an advocate, like each and every one of you are, for protecting our children. I am an advocate for making sure that those who want care have access to that care. But we all recognize that just one exposure to this poison, to this weapon of mass destruction, can kill so many. And we're seeing it throughout the United States each and every day. To that end, big tech is playing a role in the murder of these innocent individuals. The rampant accessibility of fentanyl analogs is playing a role in that. And we on this committee make our pledge to you that we will continue to work to address this issue. And I look forward to that work ahead in the 118th Congress. My first question is for you, Ms. Marquez-Garrett. We've talked about different social media platforms, and I recognize that there are top players in this. There are those who have the ability to ultimately protect the drug dealers. Do you have a top 5? Do you want to talk to us about which individual platforms? Parents are listening to you today. Who are those that we need to be aware of?
So we deal with parents, families whose children have been harmed, frankly, across virtually all of the big players. So harms in general, I certainly have a top 5. When it comes to the fentanyl poisoning of American youth, I can only name one. We are working with 50 families right now, and virtually all of those, not all, I think there's 1 or 2, virtually all of those children were connected to dealers through Snapchat. TikTok is popular among children. I have yet to speak with a family whose child was connected to a dealer through TikTok. Facebook, Instagram, at least is fairly popular with children. I have yet to speak with a family whose children were connected through Instagram. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have individuals who will meet dealers in person and they may use Facebook Messenger, for example, to communicate. But when we are talking connecting children to these dealers, it's Snapchat. And in fact, I'll add, we talk about Signal and other apps where this data is just gone. I think those also are dangerous, but those are not marketplaces. Those are not places, it's the equivalent of Snapchat creating a hangout spot where children and dealers can go and know that they're not gonna be caught, so it's Snapchat.
I'm going to also ask Ms. Goldberg, because of your expertise in this area, to please address, where are the guilty players, please?
One other player that we haven't spoken about is Amazon. We have a lot of lawsuits against Amazon relating to their sales of suicide products to kids. And somebody recently sent me a screenshot of a pill pressing kit that a person can buy to make the counterfeit pills and to stamp them so that they look like an Oxy or a Xanax. That's a crucial part in tricking buyers into purchasing these drugs and mistaking them for legitimate pharmaceuticals.
And thank you for that clarification. I don't want to complete this, Sheriff, without bringing your experience with law enforcement and how you've worked with big tech platforms to address the issue of fentanyl and its analogs. Do you think that a public messaging campaign with big tech involvement and law enforcement, do you think there could be a component that we could make families, parents, and communities aware?
I absolutely think that is something we should undertake. It is going to take several different solutions attacking this problem from every angle we can. Public education is certainly a part of that. The DEA has undertaken a program about education, and specifically Spokane County is one of, I think, 11 nationwide areas where we are actively taking a public education campaign forward. To the degree that we can get social media platforms to engage with us and help educate, I think that would be very, very effective. And it would counter some of the things our children are coming into contact.
Thank you all for being here today. This testimony is incredibly important. My time has expired. I thank the chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Blog post from SNAP in October of 2022. We continue to strengthen our AI and machine learning tools that help us proactively detect dangerous drug activity. That should sound familiar to everybody in this committee. It's basically the same thing Mark Zuckerberg said in 2018. We need to do is build more AI tools that can proactively find that contact. Same message from CEO Jack Dorsey. We are moving fast. We have various methods of identification, most of them automations and machine learning algorithms to identify these in real time. I'm sure we could pull another 100 quotes saying the same thing from every big tech firm. A promise that
Who was your first quote?
Huh?
Who was your first quote? I couldn't catch
It was a blog post from Snap. actually
gotcha.
from
Thank
Snap.
you.
A promise that innovation will eventually solve content moderation's problem, which is code for don't touch Section 230 because that'll destroy our profits. I'm not claiming that AI and machine learning aren't helpful in preventing these harms or that tech companies shouldn't continue to develop these tools. Snap says that these tools proactively identify 90% of illicit drug activity and the platform prior to users reporting it. What I'm saying is Congress should no longer accept big tech's answer that AI is the only solution to content moderation. Ignore tech's pleas to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Too often we have accepted that answer because we didn't understand the technology and we were unsure of what the next question to ask was. We assign civil liability as both a duty and a liability. Costs are imposed on those with a duty to mitigate harm, and if they fail to mitigate that harm, they are liable. Section 230 exempts information content providers from that civil liability based on a theory that the third party is responsible. Yet that third party is often not the entity making money. Most drug dealers live in their parents' basement. It's the information content provider, the platform. We are seeing harms that flow from the misuse of these platforms. The question isn't whether tech is completely responsible for illicit drug sales. They aren't. It's been happening for 100 years. It'll continue to happen for 100 more. The question is what duty we should impose on those platforms to mitigate illegal illicit drug sales. The answer can no longer be 230's near total immunity, because that regime says that despite the societal harms coming from the platforms, we are going to redirect the duty and the cost elsewhere, often to the victim. I already have a products liability bill that reforms 230 liability to allow platforms to be held liable in certain instances of products liability. And there's lots of jurisdictional questions. Products liability is usually a state issue, but that framework is unrealistic for big tech and it needs a federal response. And with all due respect to the sheriff and how hard your work is, fentanyl's poison. And it's essentially an illegal products liability case, and it also needs a federal response. So as we continue to work forward and move through this, we have to understand the policy. We have to understand, from the law enforcement side, you have a case, and then the next state over has a case with the same user, and the third state over has a case, and all of these things exist. But my question is for the lawyers, and in particular, because we'll talk about the liability shield, and we'll deal, hopefully figure out the right and a proper approach to do this. Can you talk a little bit about the evidentiary challenges you face, even if we get rid of that? 90 days, Snap holds whatever for 90 days, is an incredibly short amount of time. It's a short amount of time in a criminal proceeding. It's really a short amount of time to try and get a court order and a preservation order in a civil proceeding. So not only do we have to deal with the products liability shield, we have to make sure that the evidence that we need to prosecute or hold somebody civilly liable for these cases is protected. So I'll start with Ms. Goldberg.
You raise a very important point because a lot of these companies have auto-deletion of evidence that would be really important. By the time they come to a lawyer, that stuff is long gone, even after we send a preservation letter. But we have courts that can actually say, well, that's spoliation. It's spoliation if you delete material that's related to a lawsuit or likely to be one. I await the moment when we can actually have evidentiary battles with big tech, and I'm having my first one.
This is kind of an unfair question because you haven't got there yet.
I'm having my first one where we overcame Section 230 in a case in Oregon. We're starting this process, but it hasn't been done.
And the only thing I would add, so, as Carrie mentioned, that you do have a duty to preserve once there's ongoing litigation. We haven't gotten there because of Section 230, but the real hurdle in the case of Snapchat or Signal or other apps like that is that the evidence doesn't exist. They will preserve for 90 days what exists, but we have, subpoenas they respond to, and there's zero data on a given user. And so I would say fundamentally it's going to, in the first place, the product itself and saying, wait a sec, the data that these law enforcement, men and women of law enforcement needs, it just doesn't exist.
Well, I just think it's important to already think about that. We can have we can remove the liability shield, but if we don't have the if there's not a way for preservation of evidentiary evidence, we're still going to have a whole different set of problems that we should address on the front end and not come back.
Yes, though removing the liability shield will motivate these companies to try harder.
And we'll also have the evidence that exists on the user's phones. And we'll have their injuries, their deaths. Is, you know, like, I'm not scared of the evidentiary issue.
Gentleman
Thank you. I
yields
yield
back.
back.
Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber.
Thank you. Ms. Neville, it's apparently going to be 3 years this summer since you lost Alexander, and I know that's got to be hard for you. You made the comments in your statement that you had him for 14 years. If this is any condolence, just remember, he had y'all for 14 years too, okay? Folks, this is so important. I think you also made the comment, Ms. Neville, that this is almost equivalent to 200 people a day going down in airliners, actually more than 200 people a day. In the Texas legislature, I was on the Borders Committee and on the Pub Ed Committee. We've got to secure our border. We're under attack by Chinese fentanyl, by the drug lords of Mexico. To put in perspective, for my colleagues on the committee, Texas has about 1,022 school districts. According to Ballopedia's current numbers, 5.5 million students. So if you do that math, it's an average school district is about 5,045. When you brought in 70,000 unaccompanied minors summer before last, K through 12, you just brought in 14 complete school districts across the southern border that somebody has to pay to educate. Pardon me. Why isn't anybody paying attention to the fentanyl deaths? Is it okay for us to bring in 14 complete school districts of students and do everything we can to take care of them and not pay attention to our own children that are getting killed by the fentanyl coming across the border? We've got to get a handle on this. I hope this committee, Mr. Chairman, will examine every single option it can. I'm going to go to the lawyers now. Carrie Goldberg, how does Snapchat get its income?
The eyeballs. So it's actually an advertising company. It makes money from companies that are advertising to the users. And so that's why there's so much conversation about engagement. The longer any individual stays on the product, or the more people that you actually have on the product, then the more money these companies can actually collect from the companies that buy advertising from them. They also are very, very wealthy in user data. That's a resource that they use internally to maximize the time that people use. But when we think of consumers as the individuals who are using these products, but no, we're the raw resources. It's actually the advertisers that are their true customers.
So I don't guess there's a way to go after those advertisers. You can't make necessarily that connection. And I have a Snapchat app that I just downloaded for whatever reason about 3 months ago. I don't get any ads that I'm aware of. It's kind of crazy. Maybe I'm not active enough. But I was curious about that. And Sheriff, I guess I'll come to you. Is there such a thing as doing a sting by setting up a Snapchat profile and pretending to be somebody and inviting someone to come sell you drugs like happened in the Neville family?
Well, quite frequently, we are required to set up accounts to do undercover purchases and undercover communication. And it's not only on social media accounts, but sometimes in some money apps like Cash App and things like that for you to even make contact and to actually get the deal done, so to speak. You do have to create that profile online. So that does allow some visibility, and we can preserve evidence there, but it's some of the what I would call tertiary contacts where we can't see the other people the dealer is contacting, and there's no preservation of that evidence, is where we start to run into problems. So it's really easy to build a case, in an undercover fashion by going direct to that person, but you can't do anything with their supplier and other people that they may be dealing with.
Right, thank you. And I wish Jay O'Bernolti was here because I'm not versed in these electronic stuff. and I believe he is. He owns a company that does that kind of gaming and stuff like that. But again, maybe there's an app that should be developed that automatically stores everything on this cell phone, and so it can't be deleted permanently. Maybe that's a way for him to make money. Mr. Chairman, I've got 3 seconds left, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As y'all can see, the group that you're talking to now are very new on this committee, and I want to thank all of you for sharing. I've been on Agriculture and Education and Workforce Committee, and I'm tickled to death to serve on this committee, but I will tell you today, I am devastated by what I'm hearing, and I wish every American could hear this. Sheriff, I believe in law and order. In fact, my parents instilled in me Romans 13, that God establishes all authority. And he gives that authority, he's given you that authority to use the sword to deal with evil. They also taught that the scriptures tell us, particularly our children, to guard their hearts and minds. I wish they'd have drilled a little bit of that, more of that into me, because I have, as a teenager and in college, probably needed to protect that a little more, and I confess that. But and as a member of Congress, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it's obvious here to me today, and I don't know why the American people don't know this, but we are at war and we don't even know it. I mean, how can you kill this many people and get away with it? It's obvious that the Attorney General and the administration has no plan to deal with it. And you say, well, what can Congress do? This Congress has the power to declare war. Why aren't the American people, this country will always be a grassroots country, why are not the American people screaming over the phones to these congressional offices to declare war on these cartels as a terrorist organization? And let's send our military down there to deal with it as a first step and a signal to the rest of the world, you're not going to do this to this country. Now, that's a little extreme, but how else are we going to solve this problem? And I'd like to get your feedback on it. Sheriff, I'll start with you.
Well, sir, I don't think that that's an extreme idea. I believe that this fentanyl crisis manufactured in China is, to use maybe a militaristic term or maybe a law enforcement term, it's functioning as designed. It is completely and entirely intentional that this crisis is being brought into this country. And we should be willing to do all things necessary to stop it. Now, that doesn't mean just enforcement. Yes, we do need to address these cartels. We do need to quash them. We also need to provide treatment to the people in our country who are suffering from it.
Well, obviously, we're live streaming this. I would hope this hearing today would go viral, and the American people would wake up and understand exactly what we're dealing with. Ms. Neville, you look like you
one of the things that we're really up against as far as the general public is concerned is we're a heavily stigmatized society. Inevitably, somebody will probably email me after this and tell me that I'm a horrible parent and it's my kid's fault for putting the pill in his mouth in the first place. It happens all the time. We tend to blame the user in these cases, but when we're talking about people who thought they were taking a single oxy and die from it, that's not, they were deceptively sold something. If you came to my house and I made a cake that had poison in it, did you die of a cake overdose or did you die?
Neville, your child was murdered
Absolutely, absolutely. But we need to start changing the public perception of the folks that are using drugs. I've heard it from people when I try to talk to them about these issues. Oh, well, my child would never do that. Okay, mine did. What's your perception of a child that does this? Let's really talk about this here. So until we can change those perceptions, we are going to be stuck in this mess.
Ms. Goldberg, I have 21 seconds, but we're looking at a criminal activity here by social media companies. Now, I know Section 230, I don't think it covers criminal, but why can't we use the criminal law to deal with these people who perpetrate this stuff?
Why can't we use criminal law to deal with the tech companies? Because you're right, there is no immunity when it comes to criminal laws against social media companies. Our law enforcers never actually go after them, though. And the cartel that I think we really need to be focusing on are the social media companies, which are aiding and abetting the delivery and the matching of users to sellers.
Well, my heart goes out to you. Grassroots America, let's get with it and let's stop this nonsense. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you to the gentleman from Georgia. At this time, I would like to recognize the gentleman from Idaho.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And as we've gone through this hearing, the questions that I've had have been addressed one at a time, right down the line. So I'm not going to repeat those, but I want to make a couple of comments and then maybe steer this to a slightly different place on a related note. First of all, Mr. Dunn had mentioned that eventually military involvement against cartels might need to be considered. I think that's where this is going eventually. We've got to cut this thing off at the source, and has been brought up, China, Mexico, and the strength of these cartels, that's going to have to be addressed. Sheriff, I think you'd probably agree at some point in time, and whether we engage there, we'll find out. The other thing, as Mr. Weber pointed out, I think needs to be underscored is with the Snapchats and these bad actors in this case, whatever the solution is going to have to hit them in the pocketbook. And where they make money is where they're motivated. And so, do I have the answers? No, but do I know what part of it includes? Yes, that's cutting off their revenue stream. And so that would be the second thing. Now to segue just a little bit, because I want to see if there's a connection here. This is for Ms. Goldberg. When you file your lawsuits or when you bring on this legal challenge, what are the existing statutory tools that you use? The basis for the lawsuit, where is that anchored in law? And is there an opportunity to amend that in order to strengthen your case?
So the causes of action that we use when we sue a company for a dangerous occurrence on their platform are product liability claims. So we claim that this is a defective product, or there was a failure to warn, or it was defectively manufactured, and also negligence. And sometimes we use commercial practice violation laws depending on the state. The issue is not so much that we need new statutes in order to bring lawsuits, although I'm in favor of that as well. It's that Section 230 is used as a defense. And so it's what enables companies to just get out of court free. Like, it's a get out of jail free card. So as soon as I file a lawsuit, their first line of defense is to file a motion that says, well, we should have immunity under Section 230. And then that's just, if they win that, then it cuts everything off, and we don't get to go into the discovery process. We don't get to exchange information. And they also cripple plaintiffs earlier than that, because their lawyers are so arrogant in thinking that they will never be held accountable for whatever the problem is, that they say, like, our clients don't even have a duty to make a safe product because Section 230 says they don't have to.
Got it. Thank you for that. And that makes sense. And so thank you for that explanation. Let's shift very quickly. Sheriff, once again, and you've underscored, and this has been brought up numerous times, the border issue is part of this big part of this problem. Let me ask you about apprehensions. Let me ask you about when you uncover this, when you find this, when you make an apprehension, have you noticed any trends, specifically gang-related, not gang-related? Are these independent dealers? Have we got a new class of distributor here where they're more independent, or is this primarily gangs who have diversified?
So these are both gangs, in the defined legal sense that are trafficking narcotics to support their gang activity. But there's also, cartel level drug trafficking organizations that are pushing this. I don't know that there are any new entities that are, and kind of one-offs that are pushing fentanyl, but all drug trafficking organizations and all gangs are on some level dealing fentanyl, and they're using social media to do it.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
All right, thank you to the gentleman from Idaho. At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Ohio. Mr. Walterson.
Chair, let's see, is that working now? Yes, there it is. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel for being here this morning and this afternoon to discuss this important issue. I'm afraid that my home state of Ohio has been especially impacted by fentanyl hitting our country. Ohio ranks in the top 5 states in deaths by fentanyl and is 6th overall in overdose deaths. During a raid in my hometown of Zanesville last month, law enforcement was able to seize over 1,000 grams of fentanyl, enough to kill nearly every person in my congressional district. I'm grateful for the work of law enforcement to help get this off the street, but Congress needs to work harder to ensure our children can't access and purchase any of these drugs so easily through social media. My first question is for the whole panel. As you are well aware, sometimes an array of apps are used for the advertising, messaging, and payment of illicit drugs. In fact, 3 or 4 different apps can be used just for one sale. What can Congress do to incentivize these different companies to work together to combat the sale of illegal drugs on their platforms? Amy, I'll let you go first if you don't mind.
I think it was mentioned earlier that we need to hit them in their pocketbook until there is a hit to their profits. They're really why would they do anything, right? These are billion-dollar companies we're talking about. They're not going to do anything anytime soon that's going to mess with that.
Congress could require that social media companies, cash apps, report any drug-related activity. So we have something for child pornography and child sexual abuse material, where those platforms are required to report to NCMEC anytime they're aware of child pornography on their platforms. We could have the same thing with our social media companies, and I think the Cooper-Davis Act addresses that very issue. So it would, if there was a centralized database, it would foster the cooperation of these companies.
Okay, thank you. Would you all like that, or are you good?
So again, I agree. Hit them in the pocketbook. That's what's going to make a difference. It's all revenue driven, both for the social media companies and for drug dealers. I mean, obviously incarceration is great. Very, it's easy to prove the intent of a drug dealer. It's very hard to prove intent on a social media company as far as criminal.
Thank you. My follow-up question would be, everyone has shared their story, especially you, Amy. I'd appreciate that very much. No parent should have to go through what you've experienced. You passed off to Mr. Pfluger and I your booklet there, I believe, the 2022 Best Practices, which was fantastic. To rid social media of drug trafficking report touches on independent NGO enforcement. Can you elaborate on what independent enforcement from the NGO might look like in this context?
I think that we really, one of the biggest things that I am probably most passionate about is that third-party auditing piece. So bringing in people who are unbiased, they don't have any ties to these social media companies, to go in and look at what they're doing and then essentially give them a grade. Here's what they're doing, that's, they're completely missing the mark, here's what they need to do, here's what's working, here's what's not working, or they've got it. Because at this point, there has been so much death and destruction through these apps that they've lost the right to police themselves. They tell us, I hear Snapchat says they're doing X, Y, and Z. Well, the problem with that is Snapchat is saying they're doing it at this point, because there is no way to verify that. We have to take their word for it. And again, at this point, there's no reason why we should believe them.
Okay, thank you. Would this be more in a collaboration with social media companies, and you've kind of said that, or with local law enforcement agencies?
I kind of see it being a kind of multi-agency type of thing. We bring in people from organizations. I think there's the Organization for Safe Social Media, amazing organization, amazing education out there. Bring in somebody from that group, bring in somebody from law enforcement, bring in people with these different expert perspectives that can really take a hard look at the data that SNAP claims and see if it fits.
Okay. Thank you very much again for being here. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, the gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized.
Yeah, I don't know if you can push it.
Oh, there it is. Oh, one more time.
Can you hear me? Okay. Listen, Mrs. Neville, I'm so sorry for the loss of your son. I'm a mother, and I have a son. I have 2 grandsons, and I've mentored middle-aged children my whole life. And these kids are naive. They don't understand. And I have many friends who have lost the same exact case. Go upstairs to wake their child up, and they're dead. I'm a pharmacist, and I was currently on Homeland Security. And I'm looking at letters, and I'm currently in the GOP Doctors Caucus, Marionette is as well. And I'm looking at a letter we sent to Secretary Mayorkas about the border and how the DEA reports that over 80% of fentanyl enters the United States smuggled across our southern border. I'm looking at a letter that several members of Congress sent to the Biden administration that talks about the history of foreign actors weaponizing fentanyl, and that Russia has previously weaponized fentanyl analogs to incapacitate Chechen terrorist forces. These are weapons of war. Now there's a new one, and the sheriff will understand there is a problem now, and we know that there's a number of substances being added. These kids are going after Percocet, they're going after Adderall, they're going after Xanax. They think, because they look identical. We know that methamphetamine, we know that cocaine, we know that heroin, everything has those additives of fentanyl. It's a cheap filler. We know that it only takes the amount of 2 grains of sand to kill you dead. And when your officers are transferring evidence, they can absolutely transfer that through their skin. Now we talk about Narcan, okay, that is readily available. There's Good Samaritan laws in all these states. They fill vending machines up at sheriff's departments. They're gone before they can even turn around. They have to refill those machines. Now there's a new threat, and it's the xylazine, that is a horse tranquilizer. It's not an opioid. There's no reversal for that. You can get these addicts on the street, and they'll sleep for 30-some hours because it knocks them out. It's a non-opioid. They can get it online with the VetRx. It's a domestic vet supply. That's a cheap filler. You can't reverse that. It's a non-opioid. Now we're finding, especially Philadelphia, 15% of the overdoses or the drugs have this particular component in it. And I took notes today because this interests me. Permanent auto deleting of the content. They can promote false claims. No legal obligations to monitor. This is unbelievable. As a pharmacist, I have to document everything. These people are not, they don't have to be, they're not responsible to anybody. And it is absolutely time to change that. I'm looking at a letter that the United States Senate sent to Snapchat to Instagram, to YouTube, to TikTok. And Kat and I know in Marionette, we were all on Homeland together. We know that the cartels use TikTok and these modalities to recruit cartel members. There's no difference with this. There's no difference. These drug dealers they're recruiting might as well be recruiting cartel members because that's the same thing in my eyes.
It's true.
And their questions talked about, 4 in 10 pills contain a lethal dose of fentanyl, just like your son got, just like my friend's son got. I don't know if they've even answered this. This was September 13th, 22, that the senators signed this letter and sent it to these organizations. And Sheriff, you may know this. How many accounts have they removed? These children don't understand the lethality of the drugs, okay? And each of those companies noted that they noted they had the ability to detect harmful content like illicit drug sales on their platforms. They have already told us they can do that. So where's the mechanism to mandate that they tell us what they're doing? We don't want to suppress freedom of speech. We want to save lives because this is a poisoning of America. How many accounts have they removed for drug-related activity? We don't know that. What data are you sharing with law enforcement when you identify a drug dealer on your platform? Do they ever tell me about that? That's one of the questions they've asked. I don't know if they've got an answer.
So we do not receive any reports proactively from them as far as what information they have provided, what those numbers are.
Yeah, I bet you don't. So you've got to use your law enforcement members to go out. Plus, I remember asking our police force in Little Oak, Kingsport, Tennessee, how many people do you have monitoring social media sites to protect these children, not just for illicit drug use, for sex trafficking, for all these things? They're like, we're down 20 officers, we need 28. And then even at a roundtable with North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, do you know how many people raised their hand that said, we monitor social media sites? 1. You don't have enough funds to do this. There are no parameters. These people do what they want, don't they? So my little notes say, we've got to stop them or stomp them, one or the two. We're not here to kill you. We're here to make you accountable. Am I correct, Mrs. Neville? Am I correct, my attorney friends?
Absolutely.
Correct,
Absolutely.
We have to put accountability measures in place without hesitation because you know as well as I do, just like I just told you, they're going to come up with new things that we can't reverse. And in my mind, it's on. I'm so happy to be part of this committee. I want you to know that. I have worked to get here because these are things that we cannot delay the answers. And everybody thrives if you have accountability, am I correct?
And every day delayed is more dead kids.
Absolutely. We're going to lose a whole generation if we haven't already. And it just continues on, and the government says, we'll address that. No. It's like anything. As a parent, you give them 2 choices. You're going to like both of them. They may not, but the time has come, and I guess I don't have a question. I'm just getting your feedback. Well, I did have a question for the sheriff. He didn't. You don't have any feedback.
Proactive reporting
Yeah.
from them at all. And it would be nice if we did.
Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Well, their data disappears. How can they keep track of it? What about
Exactly.
Well, and the gentlelady's time has expired.
Yes. Well,
But
if you
thank
need
you
me
to the
later-
sassy lady
Yeah.
from Tennessee.
Okay, well,
At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I certainly want to thank ENC for putting on this very important roundtable, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses and also Ms. Neville, my heart goes out to you. I'm certain that you receive the communications from other people that you do, and I think that the barriers that have been in place when I grew up as a young lady and that other, now adults who are parenting young children had in place where you had a social construct where purchasing drugs, especially illegal drugs, was seedy, it was underground, it was ostracized, it was shunned. That occurred in areas of town you didn't want to go to, and if you drove through those areas of town, you wanted to make sure your car doors were locked and you had a full tank of gas. That does not exist in this new underground world, which is now full in front of our children, regardless of what age, regardless of what social class, ethnicity, religion, whether you're urban or whether you're rural. And for those who think that Congress or the law doesn't really have a place in this spectrum, let me just say, as a physician, you cannot mail prescription drugs. That is illegal. It is illegal to mail prescription drugs, number one. Number two, you have to prescribe OxyContin, Valium. You have to have a DEA license to do that. You have to have, there are regulations that gauge all of those drugs. If you're in the commission of a crime, sheriff, if you're the driver in a drug deal, you're liable. But yet companies are using disappearing messages knowing that they are being involved in the commission of a crime, whether it's drug dealing, whether it's selling the drugs, whether it's where the money goes, whether it's delivering the drugs into households. And we as parents are supposed to be the ones that are solely responsible for making sure that our children, one, aren't on the apps, or two, don't have a phone, or three, don't get involved with people who, because of the way social media is and the way they've grown up with social media, they see it as a non-threatening way that they can communicate with their peers. So I think there are certainly things that we can do. One, can we require, and it's not anything I've heard yet, but for the social media companies to do PSA ads, just like we did when some of us were growing up, this is your brain on drugs, to do PSA ads, not just on illegal drugs, but any drug that they think is legal that is being sold over the internet in violation of law, because there are laws that exist for prescription drugs. Number two, what's our relationship with DEA, Department of Homeland Security? We've heard about the border, but just like we catch sexual predators online, is our law enforcement and our national law enforcement involved with you on a local law enforcement level, that we're setting traps to catch people so that they know they're being monitored online and monitored even in areas that disappear. So I think there's more that we can do beyond looking at Section 230 in order to try to intercede and interdict, in addition to which education of our children, you've already heard, education of parents especially, and then I absolutely think there is culpability. And for those who think that they're not culpable, that they are not liable, again, if you participate in the commission of a crime, our laws will be, we will modernize our laws to make sure that those that are complicit in criminal endeavors are held accountable. So Sheriff, do you have cooperation with the DEA, with other law enforcement, federal law enforcement agencies? Is there talk of setting, maneuvers to have people online to catch people that are drug dealing, selling drugs, whether they're prescription drugs or illegal drugs? Both are the same, because prescription drug as a lure into other illegal activities.
So yeah, that's a very good question. In Spokane in particular, we have very good relationships with our federal partners. I have several deputies who are assigned to federal task forces. They have federal deputizations. So we have made the overt steps to staff and fund an intelligence group in Spokane that is proactively trying to monitor as much online traffic as we can. The volume is staggering, and a lot of times, we're focusing on domestic terrorism, international terrorism type traffic. But yes, we do take some steps to monitor it, as difficult as that is, because it is a huge problem. Cooperation from our federal partners, I could not ask for better cooperation. We just need cooperation from these companies. You spoke about culpability. I mean, for a company to know that this type of activity is going on their platform, but yet they continue, I think that shows at least recklessness. And some other platforms, such as Signal and Telegram, where they actually advertise to come use their platform because they don't have to respond to court subpoenas because of where their servers are located, and they don't store any data. Well, I think there's far more culpability there than just recklessness.
We just need to.
I appreciate it. Thank you. At this time, would like to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all of you, thank you for not only being here, but for the effort that you put in. And sorry that a few of us had to step out and come back. So I hope we didn't miss some of the questions we're gonna ask. Ms. Neville, I'm so sorry for your loss. I appreciate the fact that you're here. I have a 15, 12, and 7-year-old daughters, all three, and like was already mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Griffith, I've already texted my wife and talking about what we can do. We have a youth summit coming up, and this is going to be front and center. And unfortunately, this continues. We continue to have meetings like this where there's so much, I would say, avoidable tragedy. Forgive me if some of these questions have been asked, but it seems like and this is for anybody on the panel here, it seems like one of the cruxes of the situation is how do we wrestle with the privacy issues, I'm former military, so the end-to-end encryption and the disappearing messages and the fact that you can use pictures and all the things that, that it should be considered as good, when it comes to privacy, are also friction points when it comes to my 15-year-old daughter who is a minor, and the predatory practices that we see, throughout these platforms. So that is one question, is just wrestling with that. How do we, wrestle with it? And secondly, are the advertisers on these platforms, specifically Snapchat, is there a way that we leverage them as part of the solution? I've heard a lot of different ideas, but I'll let you guys talk on these ideas and where we go about it.
Thank you. I think one thing that we have to kind of think about is that we don't have to look at privacy and safety as polar opposites. There's so much discussion about privacy from the government, overreach from the government. When it comes to harmed people, though, and holding companies liable, it's not the government that's seeking information. It's individuals who've been irreparably harmed on the platforms and who really have a right to the information just through the ordinary discovery processes of court. And to actually require that the companies hand over that material of harms and crimes actually encourages safety.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's what, the accountability of having these executives do what they said they would do, and the policies that I read through Ms. Neville's binder there earlier, and actually having them be responsive, to the inquiries. So,
and I'd like to add, so there, we talk about privacy. There's a difference between privacy and data destruction. And I'll give you an example. In the Snapchat app, there's a feature called My Eyes Only. This is a data vault where you can save all sorts of data. You have a PIN that even Snap doesn't have. So it says if you lose that PIN, the data's gone. Most parents don't know this exists. And it's the equivalent, imagine a corporation that has a shredding room somewhere in the back. And if you don't know the PIN to get in that room, it automatically shreds all of the company's data. That is what Snapchat has in its app, which it is providing to children, 8 years old, 10 years old. And so when we talk about privacy, again, it's important that we clarify how much of this is privacy and how much of it is destruction. Companies keep sensitive data all the time. Banks keep sensitive data, and they keep them private. But in the event of a law enforcement necessity, we have a system that provides that there are certain circumstances where law enforcement has a right to that data. So I would argue it's not a privacy issue at all. It's a profit issue.
Let me follow up with this. On Snapchat, on the platform, and I think this is one of the problems in Congress writ large, Ms. Kamek and myself and maybe a few others are probably the youngest members on this committee, and this is one of the issues of not being familiar as a legislative body necessarily with the functionality. But on Snapchat, the messages are encrypted, they disappear, they go away, but do you have to have an acceptance of the person that's sending that to you? And is the acceptance then, are we keeping those records of who those contacts?
And I'm not sure if I'm understanding the acceptance. So, I mean, the people send snaps, complete strangers will send snaps to children with explicit material. And when those children click on it, the material pops up. There are instances now, I think SNAP instituted this sort of monitoring a tool of some sort in 2022. SNAP also, by the way, in June or July of 2022, put its product out onto a web browser. So children no longer even need the app to access Snapchat, which makes it harder. But my point there is you only have that ability to see who's communicating, not the content. And you only have that ability if you know that your child is using Snapchat.
I know my time's expired.
I know, I want to make one point though. You mentioned the advertising, and I'm 100% with you. I've been working with somebody who is keeping a database of, like say, Disney ad here, pill ad here, and that is the next level of our advocacy is going after those advertisers.
Please don't stop. Keep up your efforts. This is extremely helpful, and we appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. This time I would like to recognize myself, the gentlelady from Florida, for 5 minutes. I approach this in 2 ways. As kind of the baby of the group, the millennial here on the committee, but also as the wife of a first responder. My husband is a SWAT medic, a firefighter medic, and actually I was texting him and I said, did you have an overdose yesterday? And he said, yes, Squad 3 had an overdose. And he's working in overtime today, and he's on Squad 3, and he says, inevitably, without fail, you can put money on it, we will have an overdose today. As someone who has been married to a first responder who sees this, I think one of the elements that's been kind of left out today is the first responder. I know LEOs, you guys do a tremendous job, and there's so many resources that are out there for other things except for this, and I feel like sometimes with the Narcan issue, we continue to push Narcan as a Band-Aid, and it does save lives. Without a doubt, it does save lives, but I think we need to do far more than continue to push Narcan, because we are now seeing, and Sheriff, I'm sure you could probably speak to this, we're now seeing Narcan parties. Where people will go and they'll buy the Narcan from CVS or they'll get them from the public spaces that LEOs and our first responders place them in public restrooms, and then they'll have Narcan parties to see how far they can push that high. So that's a real issue. Sheriff, I'd like to pose this question to you about resources. I know a few, I think Representative Duncan asked about grants. Particularly with you guys, is there a grant that you can use, perhaps like a COPS grant, to have specific training done for your techs? Is there anything in this space that is specific to combating the fentanyl poisonings that we have and the tech element?
So for the tech element, absolutely. I think I am unaware of any grant through the COPS office or through Bureau of Justice Assistance that would specifically provide funding for employees with the expertise to monitor social media. Honestly, that is how I ended up, hiring and employing 7 investigative analysts who are civilians, because they had the expertise. I didn't have the time or ability to train my commissioned law enforcement people to do it. So I think a grant like that, particularly in some smaller communities, that could be a very effective way to allow law enforcement to get on top of this problem if we can resolve some of these issues at the tech end.
May I add, it's not just the physical risk to the people on the front lines, right? There is a real mental health issue here.
Yes.
And I know just receiving calls, speaking to parents, it takes a toll. I cannot imagine what many of these first responders are going through, having to walk into homes every single day to find dead children.
Thank you for mentioning that. The mental health and PTSD issues within our first responder community is a huge issue. But since my time is limited, I want to try to get into some other issues. We talk about Snapchat extensively here today. Obviously, Snapchat is hosted on either the Apple Store or Google Play. Is there any issue within the terms of service, because these apps have to be hosted on these platforms, and that's a whole nother issue in itself, but is there terms of service that we can put pressure on, say, the Google Android side of issue or Apple per se, to force them to say, if this app is not complying with XYZ, we will deplatform you?
So Google and Apple both say that they can have terms of service, but they have no obligation to actually abide by them. They'll still say that they're just an online marketplace. But interestingly, when we were preparing our legal complaint against Snap, we realized that the Apple Store says that Snap users can be as young as 12. Wow. Which even Snap says that users have to be 13. And also, you raise such a great point, because Apple and Google have so much user information. So they know how old a user is. That same user can go install Snap and lie about their age.
There is so much here that I feel like we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. Geofencing, we talked a lot about the advertisement. I know that there was a judge in Virginia that rejected a warrant that was using the geofencing advertising scope as a means to get that information. I don't think I've heard anybody talk about geofencing yet today, and I think that would be a huge part of the way that people can be targeted, particularly with Snapchat. And then another issue, and I know I'm running short on my time has expired, but metaverse. We are now seeing the dope wars where they're talking about crypto highs in the metaverse, and now we're seeing where people are able to go buy drugs in the metaverse and then they are delivered to their home. I think that's the next generation of where we're gonna see this issue going. I know my time's expired, so we can't really talk about that, but just thoughts, and we can talk afterwards, but thank you. My time has expired at this time. The gentleman from California, Representative Overnolte, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for everyone for being here on this really important topic. I'll tell you, the most difficult day that I've had in 18 years of public service has been last year when I had to console a constituent who lost both of her sons in the same day to fentanyl poisoning. And as a father of 2 boys myself, I can't imagine what that feels like. So it's a really important issue. I want to talk about something that Sheriff Nowels was mentioning, which was the incident in San Bernardino a few years ago. That, I think, really has a lot of parallels to what we're discussing this afternoon. Part of my district is San Bernardino, so it's something I was right in the middle of, and I served in the state legislature at the time on the Committee for Consumer and Privacy and Consumer Protection. So we had a series of hearings on this exact topic, like where do you set this interface between people's desire for privacy and protection of their online data against, how do you balance that against our need to get access to that data with appropriate warrants for the purposes of enforcing our laws. So my question is, and I'm going to pick on you, Ms. Marquez-Garrett, because I think you probably have some thoughts on this. Is this whole thing a fool's errand? Because one of the things we found in our hearings, you can go to the extreme and say, well, we should require all tech companies to build in a back door for law enforcement that they can get access to people's data. And I would hope that everyone in this room would be pretty horrified at the thought that government, could have access to any data that you have online, right? So there's somewhere between these, there's got to be a balancing point. The problem is, as we enforce more requirements on these tech companies and give them more responsibility for trying to enforce the law, aren't we just then inconveniencing the legitimate users of the technology while we are incentivizing the illegitimate users, the bad actors, the people that are trying to deal fentanyl to our kids? Aren't we just forcing them to go use a different platform? Because, the technology is there, as you mentioned, end-to-end encryption combined with a policy that doesn't keep data, right? The tools are there that these platforms will always exist. And let me assert that the reasons that our kids go on these platforms is because that's what the drug dealers are using. And the reason the drug dealers are using them is because they can use them to avoid getting caught. So it seems to me like we're in this catch-22 where we can propose all of these new regulations, but the only people it's going to hurt and inconvenience are the people that are legitimate users of the technology. Would you agree with that, or am I off base on
So
that?
there will never be a 100% solution, right? We will never be able to save every child. We will never be able to catch every drug dealer. But there's more that can be done here. And I'll go sort of backwards. You mentioned different platforms. I will tell you that often when we talk to children who've survived fentanyl overdoses, children who use SNAP, when we've learned more about certain dealers, many of these children would not use a different app. And, we have dealers who are exclusive to Snapchat, and it's known in the community. This is a Snapchat-only dealer because they don't want to go to jail for the rest of their lives when a child dies. The other issue I would bring, not so much the back door, certainly retaining certain amounts of data, so at SMVLC, we work primarily with children. Most of our families, the harms that have been caused are minors. And so when we talk about privacy, these companies have no age gating and no incentives to make sure that they don't even have the opt-out or the 1-800 number to make sure that they're not letting children on. And I think when we consider privacy in the context of an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 12, even a 16-year-old, someone mentioned earlier about privacy, but when I was young and I had friends over, my door had to stay open. These companies are effectively saying that door stays shut, it stays locked, and even if your 8-year-old child dies, you don't get to know what happened.
So thank you for the answer. I mean, that actually is very helpful. I'm going to push back gently on the assertion that kids, if it's not on Snapchat, they're not going to do it. I've had 2 teenage boys. I think you're wrong about that.
And I agree, and not all children.
I'm going to tell you just from my own experience with Alexander. Alex was a big chicken. Graffiti showed up in the neighborhood, and he was like, oh my gosh, we're in a bad neighborhood all of a sudden. If it was pushed back into the darkness like it used to be, he would not have gone there. It was not his nature to go into scary places. The fact that Snapchat brings it into the light, it's very normalized. It helped encourage him to go down that path.
That's a good point. I see my time's expiring. Let me just close with this, because I'm going to push back on something else that you said, which is that companies aren't incentivized to stop this behavior. And I think that is 100% absolutely wrong. Having gone through this incident with San Bernardino, I can tell you, Apple was horrified that their product was used in the commission of a crime this way. And they were caught in a catch-22 where on the one hand, they comply with millions of subpoena requests from law enforcement a year. On the other hand, they physically didn't have the ability to decrypt these devices. And what they were being asked to do, which is to open the code to allow experts to use the vulnerabilities to attack their own products, would have affected millions and millions of legitimate users' privacy, in addition to trying to deter, these narrow sections of crimes from being committed. So it was far from a simple scenario for them, and they absolutely did not want to be in the middle of it. So, I think it's important that we don't vilify the tech companies, because they're in a very complicated position that way. So I'm hopeful that we can find a solution that balances these priorities, because I never want to have that conversation again with a constituent. That was one of the most horrible moments of my life, and I can't even compare my horror with what she was going through that day. So I want to thank you for sharing your experience and the experiences here today, and let's keep working on this problem because it needs to be fixed.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I'd like to thank everyone for their participation today. To our members, thank you. To all of our panelists, thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences. Staff, thank you guys so much for all your hard work. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so much.
You sure can.